Good afternoon, everyone. Those of you that don't know me, my name is Justin Dwyer. I have the pleasure of serving as past president for Illinois Environmental Health Association. Wanted to thank everyone for being here for our first day of the Spring Virtual Conference 2025. We've got three phenomenal speakers coming up today. So this week is going to be your five food CEUs, along with the Vector certificate. And then next week we'll have sewage and water, guaranteeing that everyone is able to get their 5, 3, and 3 as required under the local health protection grant. We're going to go ahead and roll through and enjoy the speakers today. If we do have a little break, we'll take 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the speaker times. For the most part, the format's is about the same as IEHA always does. 40 to 50 minutes of presentation, and then Q&A the rest of the time. And if there's a little extra time in there, we'll take a little breather. As always, split up amongst 4 days so we avoid Zoom fatigue, because we all know staring at the computer screen all day long is definitely going to wear people out. I know it happens to me all the time. We will go ahead and get the certificates out to you guys towards the end of this week. And then once the conference is completed, you can submit those to our office, and Heather will send out the CEUs. If there is any questions or any issues during this, please reach out to our office with any concerns, or myself. You can also put it in the chat. We have the pleasure of having Arne with IPHA helping us with this. IPHA has been a wonderful partner, ensuring that we have technology and we're able to do this year after year, and very, very thankful for all of IPHA's hard work and dedication to assisting IEHA and making sure that we do have this option. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Arne, and she'll go ahead and start Adam going. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the conference.
All right, thank you, Justin. Hi, everyone. Welcome again. So happy to see all of you that are present. We have a big group today, and that's fantastic. So our first speaker that we have up is Adam Kalahar, and he does have a big presentation for us. So Adam, I'm going to immediately turn it over to you so we can go ahead and get started and keep us on track. Thank you so much.
That sounds great. Thanks, Arne. Thanks, Justin. Like Arne said, my name's Adam Kalahar. I'm with the Minneapolis Health Department in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I do apologize. We do have a lot of material to cover. So we're just kind of jump right in. There's a lot of pictures, a lot of examples. It'll be fast paced, but we'll do our best to get through in about 45 minutes here yet. Before I do start though, just a full disclosure, I really don't have any problem with the products that we're going to talk about being on the market and available for purchase by consenting adults. What I do have a problem with is kind of the dishonest advertising that we're seeing and the possible endangerment of public health. I'm also not naive. I know there are more pressing issues facing the FDA regarding consumer protection, but I do believe this does matter. The products we're going to see and talk about, I believe, need to be labeled correctly as supplements to keep them out of conventional foods. What we currently have and are going to see are supplements masquerading as foods, as I like to say. And lastly, I did start out researching this topic so I could give everybody some really great answers. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of answers for you during the presentation, mainly because it's just been so hard for me to get any real nailed down answers at the federal level. So what I really want to do is kind of get the discussion started on this trend, because it's really ramping up in wellness circles. Usually when I'm doing this one live, I ask if there's any Jefferson Airplane fans in the crowd. About half the crowd that's my age or older raises their hand. The other half just kind of looks at me with a blank stare. But this is one of my favorite quotes, lyrics from one of their songs. And it also kind of sums up how my personal views on supplements, but that's another presentation, I guess. The main issue here is that supplements and novel foods are big business. Their efficacy and how well they live up to their claims are at best debatable. So you'll notice a little bit of a theme throughout the presentation. This entire research has been very, I like to say, rabbit hole-esque. So if and when we veer off topic a bit, I apologize. There's just a lot of tentacles to this issue, and it does branch out pretty quickly. So I'm going to be Alice today, and you guys will be the kids in me. All right, so let's talk trends. We have seen a decline in the alcohol industry. Believe it or not, people are looking to cut back on drinking, and they are looking for alternatives. We've also seen a growth in other products marketed towards folks as an alternative to alcohol. These trends coincide with the continued growth in the wellness movement. And this wellness movement also coincides with the ever-expanding sober movement. We have Sober October. We just finished up Dry January not too long ago. I'm not sure if there's any other fancy names for any of the months in the year. But just because people are trying the sober movement doesn't mean they're moving away from trying to have a good time either. So markets have popped up to celebrate sobriety basically by pushing THC. And kind of begs the question, are you really sober if you're high? I guess that's up to each individual person to make that distinction. And that the sober movement has led to a niche market of hangouts and subsequently products to serve at these hangouts. We have a couple temperance bars in Minneapolis, so basically it's alcohol free. But really these products aren't limited to full-on sober bars either. A lot of the times you're going to see these ingredients that are in question on a traditional restaurant's mocktail menu, and even in coffee shop specialty menus as well. So we'll see some examples of that in the wild. Before we look at examples, it's important to understand the distinction between GRAS ingredients and GRAS applications. So to the FDA, GRAS is an approved application of an ingredient or a food additive. It's not, no ingredient itself is GRAS, it's the application of that ingredient. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about these ingredients. And we're going to hear a lot about adaptogens, neurotropics, nutraceuticals is another word that's out there. And these may very well indeed have beneficial effects on our bodies. However, most claims made by these substances have not been scientifically confirmed or approved to have any clinical benefits. This particular graph here, very scientific, without any indicators of what these bars mean. It comes from a website called Neurotropics Depot. I guess it's kind of like Home Depot, but for herbs, I guess. And I'm basically going to argue today that any drink or food that contains an adaptogen that is an unapproved food additive cannot be a food. It would be an adulterated food at best at that point. And when it comes to most adaptogens and neurotropics, I believe that these products should be labeled as supplements and not mislabeled as food, as much of them are. I was going to do a brief overview of the history of food additives, but then I realized that would probably be a full 8-hour training day. Basically, food additives are approved for certain applications. Certain vitamins, amino acids, they can be added to improve nutrition. Other ingredients have technical effects like anti-caking. And these are all approved under very specific applications and at a specific dose. Someone at the FDA did remind me too of this phrase at the bottom that I really like. The dose makes the poison. We'll see that come up a little bit throughout the presentation as well. So here's some very well-known approved food additives and ingredients. We have food coloring, MSG, the veggie wash, the peracetic acid. And then on the right side, we do have some lesser known ones as well. I found these on menus. I had to look them up. Yep, sure enough, you can find them all on CFR 21, Chapter 1, Subchapter B, Part 182. That's a mouthful. And then also we have some pretty well-known unapproved additives and ingredients. Everybody knows we can't add THC or CBD to food. Activated charcoal. If it imparts a color on the food, it's an unapproved food additive. Spoiler alert, it will always impart a color on the food. That's kind of the point of it. Is to make that nice black ice cream. You can do that at home, not at retail. Kava is another ingredient that's pretty well known to be an unapproved food ingredient or food additive. But then we also have some lesser known unapproved food additives or ingredients. We have GABA, ashwagandha. These are all ones that I have seen in the field being added to foods. Eleuthero is one. 5-HTP, that is actually a precursor in the biosynthesis of serotonin. And 5-HTP is actually banned in Poland, Italy, and Hungary that I know of. There could be more countries as well. And then I also included this here, anything with a supplement label. The reason I say this is many of the supplements out there, we're not certain what is in them. There aren't very good strategies in place to confirm the ingredients that they contain, what they say they contain. And so for that reason, I would argue that a supplement is an unapproved source in the sense, you know, your USDA stamped meat is an approved source. We know what's in that. We know where it came from. Any supplement, I would consider an unapproved source. And we'll go through some code calls too right at the end. So looking at the annex for the FDA food code, approved means acceptable to the regulatory authority. They did just recently amend this in the newest version of the food code to just simply state food from a source that complies with law. So dietary supplements, when they're used as conventional food ingredients, especially if they're misbranded or mislabeled, I would argue they do not comply with law. And supplements really aren't under a whole lot of regulatory control. Their SOPs and their safety and sanitation are regulated, yes, but their health claims are kind of left up to them and their lawyers. And as you'll see today, their labeling is certainly not being regulated to a satisfactory standard. Okay, enough about approved sources. How does a new ingredient become mainstream? How does the application of an ingredient go from unapproved to approved? There are several different pathways for new ingredients to be added to our diet. Number one, on the left hand, you can see you can petition the FDA beforehand, and they'll determine if it's GRAS, which could take years. We could also do number two, self-determine GRAS, and then notify the FDA with your research to back that up, speed the process up a bit, but not much. And then we have this third option, which is to self-determine and then not tell anyone. I usually ask, you know, what do you think most people choose when they're bringing a new product to the market? It's obviously going to be number three. I think in the past, this was easier to dissuade people using this option, stating that it might be hard to sell your ingredient to a reputable food company. But with the ease of selling and marketing online now, you don't really need a reputable food company. A lot of these products, they're here today, they're gone within 3 months. It's just kind of a money grab right now. So that opens the door for products like this that are out there. It's important to note here, natural does not mean safe for human consumption. This particular energy drink, they say it contains real cobra venom. Again, I'm guessing the amount of cobra venom in this product is so minuscule that it poses no threat to the general public, but I don't know. The dose makes the poison in this situation here. So the question I posed to myself is, you know, do we as regulators have a responsibility to protect consumers from this kind of pseudoscience that's out there? And I guess that's the question I'm trying to answer for myself as well. Who doesn't love a good Venn diagram? So I created this visual just to let you all know the small little section of the products that I'm talking about today. This is what I like to call the intersection of food, medicine, and supplements. Let's see if I can get my laser pointer to work here. So we have our traditional foods here, obviously, fish, cheese, veggies. Supplements that you always find in the supplement aisle, St. John's worts, that's a big one that everybody knows. And then our traditional medicines. And then we do have these places where all these guys kind of overlap. I kind of see, you know, some of these vitamin supplements as kind of medicine, kind of supplement. We have tube feedings in hospitals. I used to manage hospital kitchens, so we dealt with this a lot. That's that's definitely called a medicinal food. In the middle here, we have kind of things that straddle all three of these. So here I'm thinking like fortified foods, breakfast cereals, think iodine added to salt to fight iodine deficiency, stuff like that. And in this area, you know, rigorous studies have been done to give weight to the health claims that are made, and the process and the application of adding iodine, for example, to salt is highly regulated and highly controlled. This little slice right here is where we have manufacturers that are trying to sneak in ingredients to make their products more marketable, and we end up with having mislabeled products. And before we see the examples, it's important to know that supplements and foods are two different things. You cannot be both. As a producer, you must choose what you are producing. Are you producing a food or a supplement? And depending on which category you choose, there are certain concessions you have to make regarding health claims, safety, stuff like that. And there really is a history of fast and loose labeling in certain industries. I do think that the energy drink industry started it, and they are still probably the ones pushing the label still. I know back in the 90s when Red Bull first came out, it did have a supplement label. It has since moved over to the conventional food landscape with the nutrition label on it now. You can see too, this graph is actually a bit out of date. So Monster and NOS, up until probably the last 5 years, used to have a supplement label. They too have switched over now to the food label. 5 Hour Energy Shots has stuck with the supplement label. And I think that's all just for marketing and branding purposes as well. So we get mislabeled products. That's what we're going to talk about now. So these products they're one of two things. They're either adulterated foods or they're supplements mislabeled as foods. And naively, I used to think that if a product got this far, made it to this point where they're mass marketing it, spending millions on packaging and advertising, that this product must have been vetted by some regulatory authority at some point in time. Sadly, that is not true. There is no pre-market review for food. So you know how if you search for, say, shoes on your phone, the next day all you're going to see are shoe ads on social media. After about a week or so of looking up these companies, I didn't even have to search them. They just kind of found me. So that made the research really easy. Here's a first example of a mislabeled product. I just love all the certification stamps that are on a lot of these products. They make them look super legit. Issue that I have with this one here, it contains valerian root and ashwagandha root, yet it has the nutrition facts label, not a supplement label. And the advertising is really convincing. It's all about how do you want to feel? And that's how they market these things. We have the pick me up, the mood maker, and the dream maker. We can't forget about Herbalife either. Here we have one of their products, a collagen skin booster. This one's just kind of funny to me. You know, they call it a food supplement right here. They even have a supplement statement at the bottom, a brief one. Keep out of reach of children, yet they went with the nutritional information panel instead of a supplement facts panel. So this, I've had meetings with them on this before. I don't know if they've changed anything, but you know, you need to make up your mind. Are you a supplement or are you a food? And if you are going to be a supplement, you need the complete FDA supplement statement on your label. This is a energy drink that replaces caffeine with something that they invented called paraxanthine. They also threw in some 5-HTP for good measure. The type of 5-HTP they're using is from a company that has a self-affirmed GRAS status. We'll talk about that, the little loophole there. They do have a label on their website, that warning label. That warning label does not make it to the can. There's a lot going on this page here, but basically this is Peak Cocktails. marketed towards the sober curious. Contains ashwagandha. That's the culprit in this one. That would be considered an unapproved food additive, if in fact they're going to market it as food. They have gone with a nutrition label and no supplement warning, so I'm assuming this is food. Again, we have a supplement, an FDA supplement statement on their website, but that statement and that warning does not make it onto the can at all. Another one here is Haywell. They like to, all of these companies like to really advertise their GRAS certified claims. This one, it might be one of my favorite ones. It's really well marketed. Called Hio. Again, they have some warnings. You know, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, don't drink it. That warning doesn't make it to the can. And they really have a fantastic marketing plan. It's basically, you know, drink more of what we're trying to sell you so you can experience this euphoria, alcohol-free. This particular product I found on a shelf is troublesome to me in the sense that most of the examples that we've seen so far have been in single serving containers. So this is more of a bulk bottle with the assumption that it's to be mixed with other traditional foods. The culprits in this one would be the 5-HTP and the rhodiola rosea root powder. Those would be two ingredients that I would be concerned about not being approved food ingredients or food additives. And like I mentioned, they market these things on how you want to feel. We have awake, calm, shaken, not slurred. This company feels that feelings can be acquired. And in all these cases, we have nutrition labels when I believe they should have supplement labels. Have you guys ever felt like this? Talking with operators sometimes. This is definitely how I felt when I started searching and teasing these things out and raising some red flags to the FDA, just kind of beating the dead horse. You know, all this mislabeling, what did I do with it? I went ahead and complained to the FDA about it. I have a working spreadsheet of over 50 suspect products that I have complained to the FDA about. Haven't really gotten any response after about 18 months. But let's look at how this mislabeling affects us as state and local regulators. So we'll see a couple examples of unapproved food additives that are in the wild. And these were all actual menu items that I have seen just in Minneapolis alone. And I want to show you what happens when products are mislabeled as food and how they end up in our traditional food. So this was a sober bar on their menu. They're serving these products. We'll start with the parch spiced piñarita. The issue is they're taking this spiced piñarita containing an unapproved food additive, ashwagandha, and they are mixing it with their house-made banana coconut cream brulee, which sounds delicious. But essentially, they have now introduced an unapproved food additive into a food, creating an adulterated food. They also have that, this is that Bon Buzz drink that I mentioned earlier. They are mixing that with fresh pressed carrots and lime. So they've essentially turned those fresh pressed carrot and lime juices into an adulterated food. Same menu. These guys really liked all of these products. We saw this livener earlier. The Schisandra berry is the ingredient in question that I would argue that is not an approved food ingredient, a food additive. They're mixing that with an elderflower oxymel, which I don't even know what that is. But again, we're creating adulterated foods in this point. I put this last one in here, this Kin-euphorics on, because this one might be okay if this is labeled correctly. It's labeled dietary supplement. They have all the correct wording on their label. If you're just going to serve this, a shot of this straight up in a glass, that's fine. It's when we combine it with food that we're creating an adulterated food. And if it's $11 for a shot of this stuff, there's a lot of money in this business. Lastly, on that same restaurant, we have Blue Lotus. Blue Lotus is, I believe, illegal in all 50 states. Here, you can get it online, but it's not for retail sale. Here's another super cool hip spot in Uptown Minneapolis, coffee shop. We see here on their Moon Potion. Number one, they are saying that it's designed to soothe anxiety, which I believe is a medical condition. So I had to have a talk with him about that one. It does contain ashwagandha. The Bliss Cocoa contains the ashwagandha. And then over here on the right-hand side, we can see their smoothie boosts. They have CBD oil. That's a really easy one for us all to spot. Maybe one that's not so easy, the rhodiola. That would be an unapproved food additive. Some of these might be fine, some aren't. So we want to, when we do our menu review, we really want to be looking these things up. This is just kind of a nerdy moment for me as a health inspector. I called them out on a standard of identity issue here, which I've never gotten to do before. So basically, you know how champagne has to come from Champagne region of France. When you are using the phrase ginseng on a written menu, it must be only ginseng that comes from the botanical genus Panax. So Siberian ginseng is not a legal marketable term to use at retail. You have to go by its other name, which is eleuthero. And we will see eleuthero come up in some other drinks here. And we'll talk about the dangers with that one. In this same coffee shop, they have an apothecary in the back. The issue I had with this was they were taking traditional food ingredients like cacao, cinnamon, vanilla, mixing that with unapproved food additives, kava root here, and then selling it directly to the end consumer. There's zero indication on the amount of kava or ashwagandha in the case of the Bliss Potion. In these house-made drinks, we just don't know the dose that's in it. Here's another less, I would say, established herbal enthusiast. Most of, and really with these entrepreneurs, I think they just don't know what they don't know. This one in particular I've worked with, they're passionate, but they just don't know the rules. Whenever I see okay for children on a label, especially for something that's, you know, doesn't look like it's mass produced, I take a real hard look at it. So we'll take a closer look at the Goodnight Tea. I noticed that it has licorice root in it. Now, licorice root is fine. It has grass applications. But I know that ever since I became a parent, for some reason I was terrified of black licorice because I don't know, some parenting board, they were talking about its toxicity in children, and that is true. There is an upper limit to licorice root that certain people can handle. So just because something is on the GRAS list, that doesn't mean it can be added to foods at the manufacturer's discretion. So I kind of highly doubt that the producer of this Goodnight Tea at the Natural Me Apothecary packaging in mason jars is testing their final products for the I can't even pronounce this, the percent glycerin content, which is what we're concerned about in licorice root. So I could be wrong, but we need to be asking the operator that question. Because I kind of feel like we're getting a lot of people out there playing doctor. We can't do that. The dose makes the poison. We need to be protecting consumers from this practice. We'll do just a quick little I Spy here to see if we can spot the unapproved food additive. This is a little easier in front of a live audience, but I'll just kind of point some of them out to you guys. On our specialty latte, the milkweed, we have CBD. That was an easy one to find. A little less easy on Our Lady of the Lake, ashwagandha, and the collagen. Astragalus, I think, is fine. The bee pollen, we looked that one up. You can't do bee pollen. That's an unapproved food additive. So basically, when you're doing your menu reviews, if you don't know what it is, look it up, do some research. And another easy way to get some of these answers is just ask the operator for the source bottle that their ingredient comes from. More than likely, it's going to have a supplement label on it, and then you know for certain that that can't be added to food. I threw this one in here just for a little shout out to Minnesota and Prince. They have this drink called the Purple Haze. A lot going on in this drink. Number one, it contains THC and CBD. So that's an easy one for us to correct for them. I looked up gallium though. I wasn't quite sure what that was. So interesting enough, gallium does have GRAS applications. However, it's only approved in alcoholic beverages. So on an NA cocktail menu, you cannot be using gallium. There's no GRAS application for gallium in a non-alcoholic beverage. And then, these are almost on every single fancy mocktail menu. All of these are from Minneapolis restaurants. At least this one had the decency to call it what it was, snake oil tonic, but when you're doing your menu reviews, we see, OTC, over the counter. We need to be asking what is in this OTC drink? What's in your snake oil tonic when we're doing those reviews? I like this one because two reasons. When I see the word libations on a menu, not only do I know I probably can't afford to eat there, but my eyes kind of roll back into my head a bit as well. The issue I had with this one is on their menu, one of their tonics just mentions herbs and roots. We're going to have to dig into that a little better during our menu review to figure out what they're doing. When I was doing this menu review, I wasn't quite sure what rosé verjuice meant, among a lot of these other words too. I'll have to admit I had to look them all up. But I decided to look up rosé verjuice. My first hit was this particular brand. I don't know if this is the one that they're using. However, I just found it odd that this particular brand has not been pasteurized. So in the event that they are using this particular one, we need to make sure that that warning label follows onto this menu as well. There's a lot of other words in here that I really did have to look up. Ceylon, I didn't know. I didn't know what that was. It's just a type of cinnamon. It's fine. On the bottom here, we see aromatic bitters. We've all seen these in bars. But I'm going to show you an example of an unapproved aromatic bitter a little later on, just so you know that just because, don't take their word for it, what it is. Get a look at the label, get a look at the bottle to see exactly what they're using, what they're putting in this. And then lastly, we can't leave out smoothies. I don't know. We don't have Smoothie King in Minnesota. When I was in New Jersey last week, they do have Smoothie Kings. We have, there was a question on this one. They used 5-HTP as one of their ingredients. They have a warning statement on their website. I don't believe that is anywhere in any of their brick and mortar stores, nor do they let you know that you're consuming 5-HTP. In Minnesota, we have Planet Smoothie. So this is the one that we regulate. I just find it interesting that they have the supplement statement at the bottom of their website here, but they're purporting to sell food. So again, they need to make up their mind. Are they doing food or supplements? And again, like Planet Smoothie, these products are not recommended for children. I don't know if the general public really knows that. If you're at the gym and you get a smoothie, and a lot of these gyms offer daycare, you could easily share that with your child. So here's me again with that dead horse, same dead horse beaten away. That'll come up again, I promise. And so really the problem with a lot of these products on the market is they'll have a nutritional label, yet they're containing unapproved food additives. Adding to the confusions, restaurants don't even know what they're buying. We do have inconsistencies in regulation. I know we have certain states, certain jurisdictions not controlling for kava at all. It's a free fall in some states. Some states are doing a good job in regulating it. And then we have misinformation too from the industry themselves. And it's just leading to a lot of adulterated foods. So we know there's a problem out there. Why is there a problem? Why do we have this confusion? And where did we start to blur the line between food and medicine? And what's our role as regulators in all of that? I've always kind of had an issue with this phrase here. I know it's a popular mantra for people. It was in every hospital that I ever worked in. There was a big sign up. But food needs to be safe for everybody. Peanut, which is a food, is not medicine to someone with a peanut allergy. Food's a lot of things. It's fuel, it's food, it's cultural, it's a hobby, it could be pleasure. But I don't believe food is medicine. I think this catchy phrase is a bit short-sighted. Nutrition is medicine, nutrients can be medicine, but I would not call food medicine. So I mentioned misinformation from manufacturers. We'll go through a couple examples quickly. This is an energy drink called eBoost. I just like this. They say, does the FDA regulate eBoost? Yes, the FDA regulates all dietary supplements. I would say regulate would be a generous term here. The FDA reacts to supplements when a problem has been found or reported, basically. And again, they're calling themselves a dietary supplement here, yet they're using a nutrition label. They actually do have a warning on here too. Again, they need to make up their mind, what are they, food or supplement? We saw this brand earlier. Ashwagandha was in it. They claim that all of their ingredients are FDA grass. I would say that's untrue. They are using a particular brand of ashwagandha that has given them self-affirmed grass status. And if you guys don't know how self-affirmed works, you basically, if you want to self-affirm your product, you find a scientist to test it. And mind you, you are paying that scientist. So generally, more times than not, that company is going to give you back the answer you want as far as it being safe. Here's an example of disingenuous labeling. We have activated charcoal, so it's 100% pure food grade. Yet we still have an FDA supplement statement on the bottom. We've already talked about you can't use activated charcoal at a retail setting. This is another example of the disingenuous labeling, the Blue Lotus. This one's kind of funny because it actually does not contain any Blue Lotus whatsoever. 100% food safe, but they named their company the Blue Lotus Chai Company because they know that that's a powerful marketing term, and that might make somebody buy their product. And mislabeling does go both ways too. We all know that there are certain parts of the hemp plant that you can add to food that are approved food additives. This organic hemp powder from Trader Joe's, I don't know why they chose the supplement designation over food. Could be to make health claims. I really don't know, but I would, this is one of the few cases where I've seen a food mislabeled as a supplement. I don't know if there's any danger in this versus the other way around. And these companies, they're not hiding. They will advertise and brag to anyone and everyone that they've been seen in every single magazine, on Oprah. This one's kind of funny. Well, Oprah doesn't exist anymore, but I just aged myself. This one's funny. They have the FDA logo on their actual advertising website. This is one where I did get a response from the FDA. They did take, they took that one to heart, and I believe they may have contacted them. I haven't checked out their website since though, so you can't use the FDA logo to advertise your products. And do I think these companies are trying to do something nefarious? No. I think they're just trying to cash in on trends like everything. This is my favorite slide of the whole presentation. This is kind of how I felt when I was bringing these issues up to my higher ups and to the FDA. What's the big deal? I'm making a big stink out of a few herbs and flowers being put in people's foods. Don't make a mountain out of the molehill. Just let it go. But I really couldn't do it. And there's reasons why people can't use these certain ingredients. There's just not enough data. We'll see a couple examples here of possible medication interactions. And what I really want is these consumers to have all the information they need necessary to make an informed choice before they decide to consume some of these ingredients. And yeah, so we mentioned the supplement loophole here too. Basically, unsafe supplements continue to reach consumers through a legal loophole that allows manufacturers to self-affirm the safety as the self-affirmed GRAS specs. I'll go into that a little bit shortly too. I don't know if you guys remember diamond shrooms being in the news last June, I believe it was. I actually think several people died after consuming this. This was interesting because the first time I ever gave this speech or this presentation was in May of last year. And then this hits in June, and it was just really timely. We'll go over a couple interactions here. So all this information comes from Cleveland Clinic. It's a pretty reputable source. The interactions of kava are pretty well studied. There's certain anxiety medications that it can react with, causes semi-comatose state. It reacts with Parkinson's medications. Just some other substances that we find in these products that we've seen. They can interact with blood thinners, complicate hypertension. There's just a lot of issues that I think consumers need the information before they make their choice. This is an herbal drop that you add to unflavored carbonated water to make a cola flavored drink. Again, like I said already, whenever they market it towards kids, I take a much harder look. So this is everything that's in this one that is supposedly safe for kids. And you can kind of just guess the group of people that are being advertised to on this too. And people can be naive just thinking that, because it's online, it's safe, and we really don't know what for certain. So a big thing that I took issue with was, who's being targeted on this. And I really kind of saw it as there's some predatory advertising going on. Number one, do we really want to try somebody who's trying to get sober to get high instead? Ethically, I don't know where the line is on that one. This one's one of my favorite here. The moon potion, which was to ease tension and soothe anxiety. So my thought process here is, if you're drawn to purchase a drink that suggests it can soothe anxiety, one would presume that you are a person with anxiety that needs to be soothed. We just saw a couple slides ago that kava can interact with certain depression and anxiety medications. So really, the very people that we're targeting and profiting off of and marketing to is really the same demographic that we could potentially be in danger. This slide doesn't directly relate to unapproved food additives, but it proves a point I'm trying to make. And the point really is this. I don't know if you guys have heard of Prevagen. It was a supplement designed to help with memory. Their secret ingredient is a protein found in jellyfish. They're being sued right now. And one of the plaintiffs, they said that this was one of their quotes that I liked. It was, I was taught that there were people out there that protected us from this kind of stuff. And when it comes to supplements, there really isn't. And that kind of goes back to the branding problem we have as a government brand. On the one hand, people want to be protected and feel safe, but on the other hand, they don't want to be told what they can and cannot do. And really, unfortunately, until something goes wrong, people are telling us to stay out of their business. But when it does go wrong, they're going to ask, where the heck were you? And we all know that in the job that we're. So that same person that made that quote is probably thinking, they see this sitting on the shelves at their supermarket. It has to be vetted. It's got to be safe. It's got to be legal. It's available for me to purchase. And yet we have GABA in here. I think 5-HTPs in there as well. Yep. It's really hard to see, but trust me, it's in there. And so the, just because this is on the shelf doesn't mean it's. So for argument's sake, let's just assume that any possible interaction is likely few and far between. Medication reactions with some of these ingredients. So let's just leave it up to the consumer. The problem I have with that is we already control for the unlikely with our own food code rules. This graph here is from the NORS dashboard courtesy of CDC. Obviously, we know that they depend on agencies reporting these incidences, and we all know that foodborne illness is grossly underreported, but basically we average about a death a year from listeria contracted in a restaurant setting. But listeria basically gets its own rule in the food code. That's why we have the 7-day rule. I'm not saying at all that we should change rule 3501.17. It's an important guardrail that we have, and it does save lives. I'm just pointing out that we do have some very cumbersome and costly rules that we enforce across the board. And I think that protecting consumers from potentially unsafe food additives should be a priority as well. Any precedents for FDA getting involved with unapproved food additives? I don't know if you guys remember for Loco, that was a alcoholic drink that also had caffeine with it. And I believe in the 2000s sometime, FDA got together, they decided that alcohol mixed with caffeine is a public health concern. So Four Loko had to go back to the drawing board. They had to remove the caffeine from their formula. They actually just replaced it with red number 40. And you might see in the store still like some Jack and Coke products in the liquor store, but if you look carefully, that's all caffeine-free cola that they're using to make that. This was just an interesting example of how I think that these companies come up with these ideas, and they don't really think through the safety aspect. First red flag for me, this was just in an article, like an interview with the CEO in a magazine. But I see the word tincture, that immediately makes me think not food supplement. A second red flag is, I didn't put the quote in here, but they said, you make enough of trips to the store and you realize that they're selling this stuff on a different shelf. They're not combining it with anything that's easy, grab and go, convenient, end quote. The reason why it's on different shelves is because they're not food. These other ingredients that they're trying to add into food on different shelves are supplements or drugs. And then my third red flag from this interview was, the fact that they're partnering with an Eastern medicine pharmacy, getting quality plant extracts to put into all of their beverages. Here's their beverage. I mentioned eleuthero earlier. This has shown some estrogen-like activity. And so in hormone-sensitive conditions, like certain cancers, breast, uterine, ovarian, eleuthero can act like estrogen. So people should have that knowledge before they decide to consume such a drug. All right, quickly, we're going to go down one more rabbit hole. Talk about nutrition content claim qualifiers. The point on this slide is what you see and read on a label is supposed to be highly regulated. The words that are chosen to advertise a food to people are very purposeful, and they have legal meaning. If you have 19% calcium, you're not an excellent source, you are a good source. And so all of this is regulated. And so it should be the same with supplements. I know I'm running up against time here. I'm going to try to speed through. Mention the GRAS loophole. I'll just try to go through this quickly, but some of the self-affirmed GRAS documents that you can find out there are so full of fake science that they're laughable. Mainly because you just pick whichever scientist is probably going to give you your self-affirmed GRAS status. So we can't just assume that because a company claims self-affirmed GRAS that their product is safe. Here was that brand of bitters that I mentioned earlier. This one contains ashwagandha, which is not an approved food ingredient or additive. They probably contain some other botanicals that I'm not aware of. We've seen this brand before, Parch. They actually have a, if you click on this on their website, it's a hyperlink that goes directly to the FDA GRAS list, which FDA took. They didn't like that one either. I think they might have reached out. And on this one, I like to point out that Arch used to use GABA, and at some point, I think somebody got their hand slapped because GABA was removed in their newer formulations as of right now. So at some point, somebody higher up decided to pump the brakes on the GABA. Again, I know this is kind of how I feel when I keep seeing these things pop up. And all of these products, they know what they're doing. They all have good lawyers. They're well-versed in food law and free speech. They know how to cover their own butts. They put these warning things on their websites. Again, a lot of times these warnings don't make it onto the can. And if they do on the can, they don't make it onto the menu in the retail setting. So this is kind of how I want, this is an example of how people do it right. We call ourselves a dietary supplement. We have our supplement fact panel. Perfect. Again, supplement fact panel. There's a warning statement on here too. So these are the companies that are doing it right. You know, they're also competing with all these other companies for customers, but those other companies, they have an unfair advantage in the fact that they're not identifying their products as a supplement, thus giving them a larger customer base to appeal to. So identifying as a supplement does limit the usability of your product, and I think maybe that's why we see resistance to use that one. Just to keep in the front of your mind, this is the next trend, mushroom coffee. I'm going to blow through this, but there's no shortage of questionable products out there. This is an import alert directly from FDA. Kind of the best example or evidence that I can find that that mushroom coffees are not approved foods. Ashwagandha, lion's mane mushrooms, and chaga mushrooms appear to be an unsafe food additive according to the FDA. And there's big business here. This is $37 for 2.4 ounces. So there's a lot of money being made in this. We see inconsistent labeling too. This is the same brand, different flavor, I guess, but on one nutrition, one supplement. So they kind of need to make up their mind what they are. There's me again. There are companies that are doing it right for their mushroom coffees. You can see they checked all the boxes there. I'm going to blow by that one because we're running short on time. There is just, I received this guidance document from the FDA when I started to look into this. But what I really don't like is, you know, like some of these guidance documents, they say it means that something is suggested or recommended, but not required. Or it contains non-binding recommendations. That's a lot of their advice on supplements. And as regulators, you know, we can't do a whole lot with a non-binding recommendation. We kind of need hard facts. We need binding recommendations. So what can you guys do as regulators? Look at the source of of the source package of what they're using. This was in a coffee shop in Minneapolis. They're adding hormones to somebody's coffee without letting them know that on the menu. Be on the lookout for nutrition label versus supplement label. Be on the lookout for buzzwords. If you see any of these words on menu reviews, take a harder look at what exactly they're selling you. I'm going to skip by the apothecary thing. Actually, you cannot use the word apothecary in your business in Minnesota unless you are a pharmacy. But again, that doesn't mean people aren't doing it in Minnesota. Just a rule that's not enforced. This is our toolbox that we can use. We have the CFR. The problem with the CFR is it's not all encompassing. So that's kind of what makes this process of determining if something is safe or not so challenging. These can be a little hard to navigate, but these are good places to start if you're looking to see if something is an improved food ingredient or additive. And then I just ask myself, what's our job? And that's to keep unapproved food additives and ingredients out of retail. Some action steps we can all take. On the federal side, if you're seeing stuff online, marketed interstate, you can submit a complaint to the FDA directly. If it's happening just in your own city or county or state, it's intrastate, then that falls to the local health departments for enforcement. I would suggest checking with your FDA's Office of Regulatory Affairs State Liaison for who to submit a complaint to. I promised that I'd give you guys some calls that you can make. We can call 302-14A when we encounter somebody intentionally mixing like charcoal or CBD with ice cream or a drink or something like that. 302-12, this is an instance where we can call if they are purchasing from a supplier that's mislabeling their supplements as food. My hope is that if we start citing this more, the restaurants will just stop doing business with those businesses that are mislabeling their foods. Because warning letters from the FDA just isn't getting it done with those businesses. Couple of more calls. I'll include these slides for you guys to look over at your own convenience. So what's my end goal really? I want better guidance for regulators. I would like the FDA to take a closer look at the connection between retail food and supplements. And ideally, the guidance I would like to give operators is, if it has a nutrition label, go ahead and use it. If it has anything other than a nutrition label, contact your inspector. We can't give that guidance at the moment because of all the mislabeled products that we just saw that are on the market. So again, I'm just here to start the conversation. I'd like the FDA to expand the non-grass list. The grass list is like several thousand pages long. This is the non-grass list. This is it. It fits on one PowerPoint slide. This is just an example of all the nuances you can find when you're doing a menu review. My big thing here is like, let's take, so this one here, elevates mood by raising serotonin levels in the brain. My takeaway here is if these ingredients really do what they say they can do by raising serotonin levels, enhancing dopamine and epinephrine, that makes them very powerful and, in my opinion, drugs. So these things are either powerful drugs or just blatant false advertising. And this is what we're up against. We have slick advertising, protected by First Amendment rights. I found this on a science page of one of these companies. The full quote here is, "We're at the mercy of the chemicals in our brain." I would argue that we're at the mercy of what we're being told by these companies trying to sell us. And I just stuck this slide in here. It's a brand new slide just for you guys in the last week. There does seem to be some desire to look at the grass rule now. I don't agree with a lot of things or a lot of the heads of government right now. And I suspect that they may be wanting to revisit grass for different reasons. Maybe for the preservatives or the scary words that they can't pronounce. Me, I'm looking for more of the natural ingredients with health claims. So I'm hoping that if they do open up and looking at this self-affirmed grass rule, that we can make some headway in keeping some of these products off the market. I'm sorry I went over time. I did my absolute best to get through it. If there's any questions, I can stay.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
It's a roller coaster. Sorry.
No, very interesting. I do have, it looks like 2 questions. So I'll go with, there's one, are there studies showing adverse outcomes, including birth defects related to any of these supplements or illegal food additives? If so, where can these be found?
I am not aware personally of any. I know this always, I get this question too, and then I always like to bring up the state of California because they're kind of funny where they'll have the Prop 65 notice on just about everything that's on the shelves anywhere. But the funny thing is a lot of these products are made there. So it seems like it's very business friendly to produce something like this. But yeah, it's just kind of a indication between that state and that rule. But yes, I'm not certain. I know other countries have done studies, and that's why things like 5-HTP were banned there. Again, a lot of the stuff we allow, other countries do not allow.
That one done. Okay, and in the chat, are you actually stopping those products / additives from being used / sold when you are seeing them in these establishments?
I am writing the order. And then, but you and I all know we're probably not going to go out there for another year. You know, at that point, if it's still on there, then I will give them a citation. But yeah, we're not embargoing anything at this point. I am going to be putting together a work group to present to the Council for Food Protection in 2027. So if anyone is interested, please reach out to me if you want to be on that work group. It's always nice to have partners in other jurisdictions, states, industries, when we bring up a rule change to the food code. And I'm looking to get, you know, maybe something like how we have the advisory for the consumer advisory for undercooked meat. Maybe that could be a compromise between government and industry, where at least we're giving people the warning and the facts to make a decision.
Okay. And then last question here is Delta 9. I hope I'm saying, is it GRAS or GRAS?
A lot of people say grass.
Okay.
No, Delta 9 is not grass, and that is actually, that'll be on the short list. I call it the naughty list from, oh, Delta 8's only the one on here. Let's see, do they have other THC? Delta 9 is also not an approved food oil. Which is getting trickier and trickier now because, you know, states are starting to allow either hemp-derived marijuana or full-blown marijuana. But yeah, it should be kept out of food.
All right, excellent. Did anyone else have any other questions? I know there was a hiccup with the chat function. My apologies, but it should be working now, so everything should be good. If you have any
Feel free to
questions,
share my information too, and I'll send out a link to we have an unapproved food additive link in our city website that goes over a little bit of this, and I can also send out a one-pager for regulators that we've been using too.
okay, perfect. And then I think Adam mentioned he will be sharing the slides. That's correct?
Yep, I can
Yes.
share it. You just tell me who to share it with, and we'll get them out there.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I don't see anyone else. Adam, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you everyone for being here. What we're going to do just for time is we're going to shift on over to our next presenter. Adam, if you stop sharing your slides, and then Jeremy, if you want to share your slides, and I'll do a quick introduction while you're getting that set up. So our next presenter we have is Jeremy Runyon. Jeremy Runyon is the business development individual for Alliance Analytical Laboratories, an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory, and has been with Alliance for 7+ years, working directly under the owner and technical director of the laboratory. He's obtained various certifications, including HA, CCP, PCQI, Better Process Control School for Thermal Processing, and Aseptic Process and Packaging. Part of his function at Alliance is to work with clients to determine appropriate product testing for compliance with their regulatory requirements. Another function he has within the company is to assist clients with the development and implementation of various food safety programs, including but not limited to environmental monitoring, HACCP/hazard analysis, and recall programs. So with that being said, Jeremy, I'm going to just turn it on over to you.
Is my screen sharing just fine? Perfect. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Jeremy, I'm with Alliance Analytical Laboratories. Today we're going to be talking about achieving success in the new era of food safety. We're going to do a basic introduction, which she already covered for us, which was fantastic. We're going to do some basic testing, product classification, product assessment, challenge testing, shelf life testing, and some additional services that we offer at Alliance. So as I mentioned, we are an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory established in 1996 by Peter Nielsen. We offer microbiological, analytical chemistry, and we also offer consulting services from the professional side for our customers in many different industries outside of just food. For today's topic, we're going to talk about pH and water activity in different samples, because that's commonly what we see from cottage fuselage or any smaller facilities that are just looking into the industry. A lot of the individuals that are referred to us from the health departments is what those tests usually include. pH, just for reference here, it's the measurement of hydrogen ion concentration, acidity, or alkalinity of the solution, which ranges from 0 to 14. Less than 7 is considered acidic, 7 is considered neutral, where pH greater than 7 is considered alkaline. Most people know what pH is, but they may not know what foods to relate that certain pH with. For instance, lemon juice is obviously a pH of 2 and very acidic, where you can taste that in the palate. And you look at potatoes, which is 5, you wouldn't relate those to actually be that close on the scale. But as you look at this, you can kind of go through it and almost imagine the difference in those foods, aside from the chemicals. For pH analysis with liquids, this is relatively easy because they're homogeneous and they don't require any sample preparation. These include juices, coffees, or vinegars. They're all tested on an as-is basis. We do everything with a pH probe. I know some individuals, whether it be internal or even some smaller laboratories, will use pH strips. I do not recommend that just because these instruments are easy enough to acquire even for home-based operations. Getting into some other ones that we get, they're referred to as semi-solids. They're homogeneous under most circumstances. These are your thicker sauces, gels, puddings, cream frosting. Buttercream frosting is huge. For whatever reason, we get a lot of those inquiries. And it may require some sample preparation, but most likely not necessary, just depending on what those ingredients are, what the food is at the end of the day. Solids, on the other hand, they're fairly homogeneous. If we think of like beef jerky or deli meat, bread, some powders, those do require sample preparation, which we're diluting it with water. UPDI water, so ultra purified deionized water, to create a slurry, which I tried to get a picture of it. This is a beef jerky solution. Underneath it is a magnetic stir bar, with a stir bar inside of it as well, to keep that slurry rotating and to allow for continuous mixing, so that way we can get an accurate pH. Now into the fun one. This is complex matrices. They're not homogeneous. They'll contain multiple ingredients, require special sample preparation, and they contain what's called an interface. These products are treated in a manner to collect a sample from each ingredient as applicable, instead of as a product as a whole. Where the other products we're working with, your liquids or your solids, your semi-solids, is we're taking those and we're testing them all together as a single ingredient. With these ones, as we can see here, we have your bread, your lettuce, your tomato, your cheese, ham. This is some kind of vinegar sauce here, and then this would have turkey as well. And right here, where these, or even right here, where these two products interact with each other, is called an interface. There's not so much changing between the bread and the lettuce in terms of pH. They're not going to have an interaction. The moisture with the lettuce will most likely not absorb into the bread because it's not going to be very wet. But down here, the pH of this product, the moisture will allow for this area here to potentially change, which could then alter the pH of the bread ingredient itself, or the cured meat here. Those interfaces, they can allow for harborage of the organisms, and depending on what that pH interaction could be, would also be a suitable area for bacterial growth, depending on the ingredients. but this was a simple picture to differentiate those. Next up, we have water activity. Water activity is unbound water, available moisture, for another word, is present in the product in which microorganisms require to multiply. The more scientific version of it is water activity of the food is the ratio between the vapor pressure of the food itself and the vapor pressure of distilled water under identical circumstances. Yeah, under identical circumstances is a critical notation. Water activity is expressed as a decimal between 0 and 1, water being 1. Here's just an image of the Retronic unit that we have on the lab, or at the lab, I should say. It has multiple devices, so we can test multiple samples at the same time for efficiency. We do water activity for solid samples. These are prepared by collecting a representative sample of the product, means of grinding, breaking, pulling apart. Samples then placed in calibrated digital hygrometer, allowed to rest until it's achieved stasis. So right here I have corn chips, and these are beef. This is a sample of beef jerky. And what we do is these are processed in just a benchtop food processor to homogenize the sample, and get it into appropriate size for the analysis. These will then go into that unit that you saw earlier with the black cups. These are plastic cups that then go in. Semi-solids. Same concept with the cups, and the same unit is used for this. The semi-solids are prepared by collecting a representative sample and scooping, blending, mixing. Same thing, it does go into the same unit. You can just shape the containers, mix them with a spatula, and pour them into a sample cup. So there's still a little bit of sample preparation that's needed, but nothing compared to that of like a beef jerky stick. Complex matrices, same as the pH. This interface here would have more realistically an interaction of water activity change to the bread than that of the pH, but the image was easily used for differentiating the ingredients that there are. So you'll have the water activity of your bread, you have the water activity of your lettuce, the water activity of your tomato, water activity of your cheese, and each of these ingredients will all be a little bit different depending on the circumstances. These two meats would probably be relatively close to each other. But the water activity is used for, in general, what organisms are of concern, mainly pathogens, or specifically pathogens, I should say. And depending on what that range is, will determine the risk that's associated with this product. We'll get into more of that. Moving on, there's product classifications, which product classifications, I'm sure you guys are all very well familiar with this. You have your low acids, your acid foods, acidified foods, water activity control foods, TCS food, TCS or PHS, and then non-TCS, non-PHS. So we're going to do the low acid, acids, and acidified food classifications. So your low acid foods, they're going to have greater than 4.6 pH. Low acid foods are defined as any foods other than alcoholic beverages with a finished equilibrium pH greater than 4.6 and a water activity greater than 0.85. What do I think about? Cucumber. Acid foods are defined as foods that have a natural pH of 4.6 or below, like vinegar. Acidified foods are low acid foods to which the acids or acid foods are added. They have a water activity greater than 0.85 and a finished equilibrium of 4.6 or below. An example of an acidified food, pickles, pickled anything really, your asparagus, peppers, eggs. And just for reference here, there's some images. These are all common classifications that we're working with. There are a lot of products that we'll get. especially for farmers markets. We get a lot of pickles and things like that. Water activity controlled foods. I'm not sure you're able to see this. I apologize. The image on the right has some common examples for water activity values. So water activity controlled foods are those which have a water activity of less than 0.85. And oftentimes they're heat treated either prior to, during, or after packaging to remove pathogenic vegetative cells. The water activity value of 0.85 can control a lot of pathogens, or actually will control all pathogens at less than or equal to 0.85. But there are other molds. There's molds and yeasts that can grow under that. For instance, if we're looking at this list here, we have maple syrup at 0.85. If that lid of a sealed maple syrup jar is taken off as you put it on your pancakes in the morning and then you put it back on, if you allow it to sit, even refrigerated, it could accumulate the mold around the rim. That's because that product still has water activity that can grow mold. So in terms of water activity controlled or shelf stability is one of those terms that can get loosely used. When I think of shelf stable, I would want to make sure that if I leave it out, nothing's going to happen to it, including discoloration, mold growth, but mainly pathogen. So looking at the list here, you have fresh meat to crackers, and you can easily see a difference between those items. You can imagine a difference. When we're, so you have your fresh meat with a 0.99 to 1.0. And we'll move down here. We'll take your crackers at 0.1. Easily distinguishable in terms of water activity. Now we'll take your cereal at 0.1 and your flour. Both of those would be dry. I don't know if I would be able to tell the difference between that in terms of water activity. However, when we start getting into your cake icings, slight jump from flour, but easily distinguishable, I would believe, in terms of palatability. Next, we get into TCS PHF versus non-TCS non-PHF. TCS foods, time temperature control required for food safety. PHF is potentially hazardous food. TCS is more commonly used verbiage. However, we run across the use of PHF quite a bit from other states and individuals that we work with. So I just like to include the terminology throughout the conversation. Non-TCS food products which do not require time temperature control for food safety, and same with the adverse for PHF. TCS foods are high risk. Under most circumstances, they require refrigeration. They have a limited shelf life, 7 days, based on the food code. Now, what classifies a product as TCS or non-TCS? We'll jump into that. Here, these images I grabbed from FDA, different medias. So this is a small image, sorry about that. Sometimes it comes down to pH and water activity. Is the product heat treated or thermally processed to destroy vegetative cells? Is it packaged to avoid recontamination or contamination during that process? So how is it packaged? What is the pH and water activity of the product? I'm not sure if you can see over here very well, but this is table A and table B. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this as well. So table A is controlled spores because it's heat treated and packaged aseptically to avoid contamination. Heat treated takes care of your vegetative cells. So as long as you have a 0.92 or less, any pH is acceptable because you're controlling it with water activity after heat processing. Non-TCS. Over here, this is for product, but not, so either heat treated or not heat treated, and then not packaged. So you can see that this has become a little bit more strict in terms of non-TCS, because we have more ranges. We have a lower pH requirement than 4.2 instead of 4.6, and we have a lower water activity requirement. These are the table that's a little bit larger, easier to view. Again, it's the same table as before. This comes from the food code directly. You have your less than 4.2, less than 0.88 for those foods that are not heat treated or heat treated and not packaged. Now, heat treated, what that means is sufficient temperature to kill the vegetative cells of pathogens. There are spore formers such as Clostridium botulinum and Bacillus cereus, which are two, Clostridium specifically is deadly. Bacillus cereus is also a spore forming pathogen, which is not susceptible to heat treatment under most circumstances that you'll come across in food without further processing, such as retort. Based on all of the values that we talked about for pH and water activity, processing steps, and classification, we work into product assessment and challenge testing if necessary. The purpose of a product assessment is to determine if the product requires time temperature control for food safety, determine the shelf life of the product for food safety, which includes demonstrating if the product can control the growth of pathogens, or demonstrate the product's ability to reduce and or eliminate inoculated organisms. So as listed on the previous table, we see the use of the terminology product assessment. Okay, that it's not, instead of just strictly stating it's non-TCS or it is TCS, we show that it's a non-TCS and then PA for product assessment. That's when we'll get into these areas here. That would include product characteristic monitoring. pH and water activity are your main ones that we focus on. So oftentimes moisture can be a part of it. Challenge testing, which challenge testing is the introduction of organisms at known levels, quantitatively analyzed throughout the duration of the study at the specified conditions, such as refrigeration, ambient, or oftentimes increased temperatures for worst case scenarios. We'll also do microbial indicator testing, which will include APC, yeast and mold, lactic acid bacteria. So we'll have APC as your total bacteria counts, yeast and mold. The lactic acid bacteria are those that can survive or enjoy lower, or I should say, higher acid environments with lower pH. Lactobacillus is a good one. Those produce what's called lactic acid, and they can drive the pH of the product in a different way than what it sits once it's produced. Sensory testing, I also advise as product assessments, color, texture, and odor, just to name a few. Taste is on the list, but not until the challenge testing's done. These are services that we do offer. I typically recommend sensory testing in this nature to be done by the client as well, looking for color changes in their product over time. So factors to keep in mind when developing product assessments and challenge studies. What is the product? How is it packaged? How is it intended to be stored? What duration is the product intended to last? Is the product a single-use item, packaged to be consumed on multiple days? Pathogens to be considered? Additional monitoring that should occur, such as pH, water activity, microbial indicators, organoleptic sensories. These are the initial questions that we work through when developing the studies. Clients actually don't always know the answers to a lot of these, so we have to work through that with them, depending on what their goals are. Selecting pathogens for the challenge study. This looks pretty familiar based on the other ones that we had already seen. So you have a similar table. What we'll see here is the difference between, this is an interaction between the pH and the water activity products for the specific use of understanding what pathogens are of concern. if they were to be present. We have to assume under worst case scenario that they may be potentially there. So this is where experience and knowing the product is critical. For instance, some of these are not applicable to all products, like Vibrio is not a critical component for many foods outside of seafoods. Now, what I do want to mention is if we have a pH, we'll take a food with a pH of 4.2 to 4.6 and a water activity in here. These are the 4 pathogens that we have to introduce at a known level into the product, held under the conditions of use, and determine if there is a growth greater than 1 log. I usually look for less than or equal to 0.5 log for change. And if it can control the growth, that's a good indication that the product may not have to be considered TCS. However, there are a lot of other characteristics that need to be paid attention to. Shelf life testing, TCS foods. So we need to determine the following after classifying the product and reviewing processing steps. Look at storage conditions, applicable pathogens, which we just reviewed, critical product characteristics, moisture, salt, water activity, and pH are the bigger ones. Microbial indicators, again, these are used through product assessments and shelf life testing. Product assessments and shelf life testing can go together, but they are not one of the same. Sensory testing, duration of the study, and the testing intervals. Testing intervals are critical for both for product assessment and shelf life. So then we have a non-TCS food, which a lot of these are going to be the same, right? Critical product characteristics, but applicable pathogens are removed because non-TCS foods may or may not have any pathogens that would fall in line with them based on the previous list and the processing that they go through and how they're packaged. So all the other ones are the same, as we can see. Duration of the study and testing intervals. Duration of the study, there's some reference documents out there provided by NACMCF, which is depending on how the product is to be sold and what the product is classified as. We usually look at 30% beyond this intended shelf life. For limited shelf life, such as a TCS food, we go 50% beyond. So if you have 10 days, then you'd be looking at a 15-day study. And those intervals are then tightened up. If we're looking at something with a 1-year shelf life, then we go 1.3 times that. So you'll add a few extra months to the study. It's a safety barrier. So as an example, we'll take a chicken salad to refrigerated storage conditions, desired shelf life of 10 days, product pH 4.6, water activity 0.95. So if we go back to that table, we saw that there were some applicable pathogens, which are going to be your Listeria, Salmonella, pathogenic E. coli, so those are your STEC, and Staphylococcus aureus. We'll look at critical product characteristics, pH. The reason that we'd use pH as a critical characteristic here is the water activity is not going to be used as a control measure by any means. It's the fact that the pH is 4.6. If this deviates, this water activity would have to significantly decrease in order for it to be applicable to these same 4 pathogens. Once this adjusts, this opens this product up to a series of additional pathogens that would have to be monitored. Microbial indicators. This would be your total plate count, yeast mold for this product here. Lactic acid bacteria could also be applicable because of what that pH range is. Sensory testing, color, odor, appearance, visual mold. Testing intervals, being that we are challenging this product for the pathogens, I need to monitor this at day 0, 1. So this is when we introduce them. I need to recover it to make sure I have sufficient log value. as an introduction. One, for the day one, I need to understand what that rate of reduction has looked like. Now, this is refrigerated, so our organisms are going to be temperature hardened. They're already going to be in the refrigerator, so they won't get cold shock when they're introduced. So this is to make sure that we have adequately introduced the organisms and that we're able to recover them in the product. 3, 5, 7, 10, 12, and 15 days. So the 7 days for food cook, 10 days we're going to use this as a confirmation date. And to make sure, like, if it fails here, then I can go down 50% from that, which will be less than the 7 days. So you would stick at 7 days. 12 days as a confirmation for, again, 50% of that. And then 15 days, which would be 10 days. So it is recommended to have multiple dates throughout there. I think it's usually 5 to 7. We stick with the 7 or more intervals, just to accumulate as much data as possible. And this testing is recommended to be done in duplicate at minimum on 2 separate batch productions. So that way you're able to account for the inherent product variability, but also potential process variability. And then for the testing intervals, the product monitoring, we can shorten or we can extend these out. We don't need as many from the challenge tests because these are going to most likely not fluctuate. And these are for safety. These ones are more so just for product monitoring to capture that data to understand what is happening. But this pathogen testing is the most critical, especially for a TCS food. I'll look at shelf life testing for a non-TCS food. Well, as a recommendation, or we have product pH of 3.8 and a product water activity of 0.98. For an example, we have hot cells. Thermally processed, hot filled, ambient temperature storage, desired shelf life of 1 year. Critical product parameters include pH. Again, this pH is at 3.8. Water activity won't have any control, so we're not going to use that one. Microbial indicators, APC, yeast mold, and spore count. The reason that we have those is because this pH and water activity will still allow for mold, especially on the inside of the lid. We have to remember that this is thermally processed, so it's been heat treated and hot filled. So it's going into the container that's been pre-sanitized, or sterile, sanitized is the best word. And then it gets put in the container above 160 degrees. And the inversion of that container has occurred as well, based on conversation with the farm. Ambient storage duration, 1 year is their goal. So we'll do sensory testing, appearance, odor, color, product separation, thinking of a hot sauce. There's some components in there that could separate out from each other, leaving the thicker stuff to the bottom, some of your watery substances to the top. Testing intervals, being that we have a pH as our control, we'll look at 0, 30 days, 90 days. Sometimes we will throw in some bi-weekly testing for the first 30, just to accumulate that data, make sure there's no shift, assuming equilibrium has been achieved. And we can split these out a little bit further, just depending on what the product is. And we'll go 30% beyond that for a total of 475 days. While we're on the topic of shelf life testing, there's real time and then there's accelerated. I didn't build a slide for this. I wasn't sure if I was going to have time or not. So with accelerated, everyone thinks that just because you increase the temperature of the storage equates it to less time having to actually be tested. We offer accelerated conditions, but we do not offer any kind of conclusion data, or any conclusions, I should say, based on that. There was an equation that was developed for the medical device industry, which is 1 week or Yeah, I think it was 1 week at accelerated conditions of 40 degrees centigrade, 75% relative humidity, equated to 1 month at ambient. We have determined that that is not applicable to a lot of foods. It's a misconception, and it could be quite dangerous. There are companies that have utilized the accelerated shelf life testing to place their products shelf life well beyond what they should be, not only from a safety standpoint, but also a quality. So companies that have a shelf life of 2-3 years, and we looked at their data, and it should have been maybe 6 months. So after 8 months, they're calling us asking why their bottles are exploding or why there's mold growing on the product. Accelerated data does not always work out. Real time is what we have demonstrated during the previous slide, is everything is done in real time. It's 6 months equals 6 months of testing plus 30%. All right. So as a laboratory, we offer more than just pH, water activity, and water phase salt testing. Water phase salt is applicable to our seafood or fish. We have a lot of smoked fisheries that work with us. We do shelf life testing. Again, accelerated conditions are offered, but we do not offer accelerated testing with conclusions. Pathogen challenge testing, which we went over. We offer an extensive list of pathogens. One that we do not work with is Clostridium botulinum for many reasons, mainly for the safety of our animals. Nutritional analysis and labeling. We do offer this service as well through analytical chemistry. We're fortunate enough to have a team here, 2 separate teams actually, one on the chemistry side and one on the micro side. So the nutritional analysis and labeling, we can do full nutritional panels. We also offer supplement panel testing to some degree, but we do not create supplement panels. We only do nutritional facts for FDA compliance purposes. Water testing, potable and non-potable, anything that's used in the facility for water. We do offer that year in quality coliform. Professional services, product classifications, process authority review letters, consulting services such as temperature deviations, good manufacturing practices, SOPs, and also SSOPs, review and development, depending on the facility. So we have a large list of clients that we've worked with, and we've been fortunate enough to work alongside those companies in the development of their programs, and they trusted us to assist them with that as well. So that is all that I have for this. There's not really much to talk about from the laboratory testing side of it, unless there's specific questions, and I didn't want to dive too deep into certain things.
Does anybody have any questions for Jeremy? I was looking at the chat. I didn't see anything in there. And then I'm going to check the Q&A. I didn't see anything in there. So the floor is open if you have questions. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, there's a question in the Q&A. All right, here we go. What is a food item that is extraordinarily difficult to test and why?
I would say when we get emulsions with vinegar and some oils in there, and we get told that we need to test the pH and water activity of that product, there's a large separation that occurs, and it makes it difficult to accurately represent that sample for either one of those values. Those ones are difficult. We prefer to work with the ingredients themselves in place of the product at that point.
Thank you. This one. Anyone else have any other questions? Oh, sorry, here we go. How much does pH and water activity typically cost?
So pH for a liquid, as we discussed, is simple test. That's $17. Your pH of a solid is $30 because of that additional preparation that we have to do. Water activity is $38 for all products, whether we have to grind it or mix it, because there's always some sort of preparation that's involved. So between $55 to $70 if for both of those services combined, depending on what the product is.
Anyone else have any other questions? Okay. Checking the time here. Okay, well then Jeremy, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for joining us for today. What I'll go ahead and do, if you would like to stop sharing your screen, we ended a little early. So what I'll do is oh, I'm sorry. As I'm just talking, someone has one more question, Jeremy, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Is analysis of fermented beverages by home brewers or breweries being done?
For pH analysis, yes, we've done shelf life studies for fermented beverages. Challenge testing, we have also done, just depending if they were filtered or if they were thermally processed post their packaging being done.
Okay. Kurt, did that answer your question?
Was there a specific analysis? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, yes, thanks. Okay, good, good. All right, so again, Jeremy, thank you. We have about 15 minutes, a little bit more than 15 minutes before our next presenter. So I'm going to go ahead and have us go on a break. During this time, I'll pause the recording. And then when we're about to start up right at 3 o'clock, I'll restart the recording and I'll see everybody when they get back. Again, thank you, Jeremy, and I'll see everyone back at 3 o'clock.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, everyone, if you're here or listening, I wanted to kind of welcome you back from our little break that we've had. To kick us off for our 3 p.m. session, we have Carolyn White joining us. Carolyn White is a retail food specialist for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in the Office of State and Cooperative Programs. She's based out of Kansas City, Missouri, and works with the state of Illinois and Indiana. Prior to her time with the FDA, she was a training and grants manager for a local environmental public health program. With over 15 years of combined regulatory and industry experience, her focus remains on building collaborative relationships to improve public health outcomes. She believes that quality improvement through the voluntary National Retail Food Regulatory Program standards can transform food protection programs and make significant impact on reducing foodborne illness risk factors. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carolyn.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, IEHA. It is wonderful to be back in front of many of you in this virtual space. I just want to say you all have a phenomenal lineup for this year's Spring Virtual Conference, and I am just thrilled to be a part of it. For those of you who have not yet met me, as mentioned, my name is Carolyn White, and I am an FDA retail food specialist. But more than that, I am your retail food specialist. So my job, my entire purpose, is to be a resource for you for anything related to operating a successful retail food program. So if you have food code questions, retail program standards questions, really anything retail food related, I'm your girl. Now, I'm excited to finally get to bring this topic to Illinois. We were delayed a little earlier this year, but I think we're ready to roll today. We're going to be able to take a deep dive into the world of date marking. You can see the title of my presentation is Demystifying Date Marking. We're going to dig in. And I know I've had conversations with several of you on this topic, but I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to bring it to this forum when we have so many of you on all at once. So let's get started. Now, We're going to cover a ton of ground in the next 45 minutes. We're going to lay the foundation for our discussion with some key terms and some things to keep in mind. We're going to then take a look at the history behind the science that was necessary in crafting the language of the provisions we're going to talk about. We're going to go through the date marking provision. So that's FDA Model Food Code 3-501-17 in its entirety. We're going to talk exceptions. We're going to talk date marking systems. We're going to dig into those pesky manufacturer's dates that I know folks have questions on. And once we clear the date marking provision, we'll talk about date marking's sister provision, disposition, or 3-501-18. And after we clear all of the code language, we're going to walk through some scenarios and kind of test our knowledge and see how what we think. Now, you know me, if you've seen me present before, and we're going to make this an interactive session because who wants to just listen to me yap for 45 minutes? I know I don't. I'm boring. So have your chat ready so you can participate, right? Does this sound good to everybody? See, this is the first test of the chat. Are we willing and ready and able? I see, yup, yes, beautiful. All right. So with that, let's get into it, shall we? All right. Before we dig into the provision itself, we need to keep a few key definitions in mind. And so the FDA Model Food Code has clear definitions for time and temperature control for safety, or TCS food, as well as ready-to-eat food. So let's do a quick review because I think it's always good to have those, right? All right. Now, the definition of TCS food means a food that requires time and temperature control for safety to limit pathogenic microorganism growth or toxin formation. Now, the TCS food definition includes a ton of stuff, right? Includes our animal foods, whether they are raw or heat treated, includes our heat treated plant food, specifically calls out our raw seed sprouts, our cut melons, our cut leafy greens, our cut tomatoes or mixtures of tomatoes, keeping in mind those that have not been modified in a way to, prevent that microorganism growth, and our garlic and oil mixtures, again, those that have not been modified. Now, the definition of TCS food does not include a couple of key things. So an air-cooled hard-boiled egg with the shell intact, right? Now, does that include, boiled eggs that we dunk into ice water? No, correct, Stephanie, it does not. Specifically talking air-cooled. So TCS food also does not include pasteurized eggs with the shells intact, or foods in an unopened hermetically sealed container, commercially processed to achieve and maintain commercial sterility under non-refrigeration. Now, you may note under both of those egg examples that I gave, you'll see the words with the shell intact, right? That's kind of a key here. Once you crack that shell or you peel the egg, that product is now considered TCS, all right? All right, perfect. Now, I know we've talked before, you may have seen the tables. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to stick to what we have here. We can get into a table A, table B discussion when it comes to TCS food, but I don't want us to get lost in the sauce when it comes to the overall kind of concept we're going for here. All right, now, second definition we want to keep in mind is ready-to-eat food. So again, in the model code, ready-to-eat food is defined as a food that is in a form that is edible without additional preparation to achieve food safety, or is a raw or partially cooked animal food with the correct consumer advisory, right? That's a two-parter, or it's prepared in accordance with the variants, or it may receive additional preparation for palatability, all right? So this definition includes our raw animal food that's cooked according to the code, our raw fruits and vegetables that have been washed, plant foods that are cooked for hot holding, all TCS foods that are cooked and cooled properly, our plant food that does not require further washing, cooking, or other processing, and from which rinds, peels, husks, or shells are removed. What plant food are we talking about? If we're talking about peels, husks, and shells and rinds, what are some examples of things that we may be thinking of when we talk about ready to eat? Oranges, absolutely. Yep, all of our citrus fruits, bananas, all those things. Yep, absolutely. And shell nuts, fantastic. So ready-to-eat food also includes substances derived from plants such as spices, seasonings, and sugar, Bakery items, so our breads, cakes, pies, fillings that don't require any additional cooking for food safety. Right? So this definition also includes products that are produced in accordance with our USDA guidelines that have received lethality treatment for pathogens, such as our dry fermented sausages. So this is going to be your salami, your pepperoni, our salt cured meat and poultry, like our prosciutto, your country ham, your Parma ham, and our dried meat sticks, like our beef jerky, right? So our ready-to-eat food also includes manufactured foods in a hermetically sealed container that's undergone that thermal processing for our low-acid foods. That's quite a list, right? There's a lot of things we consider ready to eat. And so our ready-to-eat food does not include our commercially packaged food that bears manufacturer's cooking instructions. And I know as Illinois is on the 2022 code, I've talked about this with some of y'all. And I do want to note there is a difference between heating and cooking instructions for food safety on an instruction panel, but that is a conversation for another day. So yeah, if it bears a manufacturer's cooking instruction or a food that the manufacturer has provided information that has not been processed to control pathogens. And what I mean by that, let's use an example. Does everyone have a bag of flour at home? Likely, probably, maybe. You may find the statement that the product is still raw and requires cooking if you look at the labeling. If you're not seeing it on the front or back, check on the bottom of the bag. And you may find that your flour is telling you via labeling, it's not considered ready to eat. All right, so I want to keep all of these things in mind. With that being said, right, anytime we talk food safety, anytime I talk with folks about things with the food code, the question we're going to ask is, what is the pathogen of concern, right? So for today, for date marking, our pathogen of concern is Listeria monocytogenes, right? So Listeria is a bacterium that occurs widely in both agricultural and food processing environments. So ingestion of Listeria monocytogenes can cause listeriosis, which can be a life-threatening human illness. 20 some odd years ago, back in 2000, CDC reported that of all the foodborne pathogens tracked by CDC, Listeria had the second highest case fatality rate at around 21% and the highest hospitalization rate at just over 90%. So that's a pretty serious bug, right? Now, our serious illness almost always occurs in folks who are considered to be at higher risk. So our elderly folks, those with their compromised immune systems. And I will also note that, there can be some really devastating consequences of listeriosis in pregnant folks, right? Leading, including and up to fetal death. So it can be really serious. These outbreaks can really cause a ton of harm, right? In our healthy adults, we tend to see listerial gastroenteritis, so just that mild tummy trouble in healthy adults. So when we're talking date marking, we're going to keep this in mind. Our targeted pathogen of concern is going to be Listeria, right? So we're going to keep that in mind for the rest of the afternoon. And so the chart you're seeing in front of you is showing the average generation time of Listeria monocytogenes. And so when we say generation time, we're really talking the amount of time it takes to double the population of the organism, right? So notice that, highlighted in blue, at 100 degrees, Fahrenheit, the generation time is 50 minutes. 50 minutes! So pretty quick. But as we look at our cooler temperatures, as that temperature drops, the generation time slows, but we're not getting to a no growth level, right? Listeria can even survive the freezing process. What food have we seen with Listeria outbreaks involving freezing have we seen in recent years? There's a big one that comes to mind. What kind of products have we seen? Absolutely, Nick. Ice cream. Yep. We've had several recently. Yep. Shakes. Absolutely. So yeah, we had some ice cream outbreaks back in 2023 in New York, 2022 in Florida and Ohio. How many folks remember the Bluebell outbreak back in 2015? That one hit national news quickly. So yeah, so freezing doesn't stop it. All right, so we've laid the groundwork, and now we're going to go ahead and dig into the code language, right? So as a reminder, as we're talking date marking, we have to have two things in order for date marking to apply to a food. Our food must be both TCS and ready to eat. All right. All right, so first and foremost, Part A of 35117 states that all ready-to-eat TCS foods, these are our foods we prepared in-house and held longer than 24 hours, are required to be date marked. The day of preparation is considered day 1, and you can hold the food for a maximum of 7 days at 41 Fahrenheit or below. Can you do less than 7 days? Could I do 5? Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So 7 per the code is our maximum. So let's look at our picture here on our slide. We've got our house special, our spaghetti and meatballs, right? We're gonna need to date mark that if we plan to hold it longer than 24 hours. I'm sure we're gonna want to, because I'm pretty sure everyone knows that red sauce pasta tastes better the next day. That is a second day success kind of food. But even if we keep the cooked ingredients separate, so we keep our cooked noodles and our sauce completely separate, right? Each container is gonna require date marking. All right. Now, Part B of 35117, I think, is where folks start to struggle a little bit. I think we're all on the same page that, our in-house prepared items are going to require date marking. But when we get into our commercial prepared foods, I think we start to see some confusion. And so the code requires that all ready-to-eat TCS foods prepared and packaged by a food processing plant require date marking if opened and held more than 24 hours. So the day that package is opened is considered day 1. And all of the requirements in Part A still apply. So that includes our 7-day maximum, that 41 degrees or below. Those are all still in play, right? Now, the 7-day window may be shortened if the manufacturer's date occurs prior to the 7th day, if and only if that date is based on food safety. Now that manufacturer's date, I mentioned pesky manufacturer's dates, right? So this is where sometimes folks tend to get tripped up, and I'll tell you why. It is not the intent of this provision to extend shelf life beyond that which is intended by the manufacturer. However, manufacturers assign a date to products for various reasons, not necessarily food safety. And spoilage may or may not occur before pathogen growth renders the product unsafe. So you may have the food may completely spoil before we even get to a food safety concern, right? So most of our use by and sell by dates are not enforceable, nor are they actionable, because they're not necessarily based on food safety. Okay, so most, not all, but most sell by or use by dates, they're placed on food packages voluntarily, right? Why do you think that is? So if we have all these dates, but they're not for safety, what are they really for? Quality. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So what types of foods would we expect to see here? Oh, I like that, Kurt, soundness. So what are some foods that you may have seen? Some, commercially packaged stuff that we would require date marking when opened. What have you seen in the field? Maybe our retail deli counter receives, deli meat. Okay, good. Maybe we receive a cooked meatloaf that we portion. Ooh, Emerson says sliced cheese. Hold on to cheese. We're going to talk about cheese today. What else? Do any of your restaurants receive their tomatoes pre-diced, or their lettuce pre-cut, or their sides pre-made? Okay, Carly says salad dressings. Ooh, salad dressings are fun too. Yeah. So Dajun just says yes. So sometimes we see that. Now, so again, date marking applies when those packages are opened. Let's talk a bit about the milk jugs. We see whole thawed turkey. Can we talk about open condiments? We will talk about condiments, Amanda. Hold tight. Peeled boiled eggs, if they come in a commercial package, Kurt. Yeah, if you see those commercial package boiled eggs. Yep, those are usually, now once those are opened, remember date marking applies. So let's talk about the milk jugs we see in our picture here on our slide. Is the use by date on the milk a food safety date? Is the date on our milk jug? Yep, sell by. Yep, I'm seeing a resounding no. Carly says a no. Yeah, nope, it's not. Now, yep, Karen says freshness. Did anyone else have a mom that didn't even bat an eye at the milk being a few days past the date? Or is it just mine who was like super stout of stomach? Absolutely. What did we typically use to determine if the milk was still good rather than that sell by date? 100%, Stacy, the smell test. Yep. The smell check was what passed in my house also. If it's not chunky, we were drinking it. Oh my goodness. It's still good. Yeah, sometimes taste. For the bold and the brave, sometimes we use taste rather than smell and looks. Yeah, sometimes we have a combo of all three. Most of the time, I think that works out well for us. Taste, that's a gamble. Absolutely. So when it comes to our milk, right? When we open it, are we going to date mark it? Mark, I would agree. That would ruin my day. So we open the milk in our restaurant. Are we date marking it? Yes, 100%. Yep, we're going to date mark it. We're just not going to be as concerned. There we go, Stephanie. If held over 24 hours, I love it. And that's really going to be one of those key pieces is that 24-hour window. If I open that jug of milk and I make enough milkshakes, I go through it in a service, I don't have to date mark it. Perfect. Absolutely. So we touched on all of those. Now, you know, if the food becomes inferior quality-wise due to time and storage, it is entirely possible that safety concerns are not far behind, right? So we do want to keep that in mind. I also want to note, just because a condiment has keep refrigerated on the label does not necessarily indicate date marking is required on the product. Is ketchup a TCS food? No. But do a lot of those bottles have keep refrigerated on them? Yeah, exactly. So we have to be really cautious here, right? So, baseball season apparently is around the corner. I say apparently because I haven't been paying attention. But have you gone to the ballpark and noticed those large pump dispensers for condiments? You've got ketchup, mustard, relish. We're very familiar with these. But you're starting to see more mayo and ranch dispensers, right? And these are all kept at room temperature. So we have condiments that have been acidified to the point where we can leave it out and nothing's going to grow. I mean, is there anything more Midwest than a giant vat of ranch sitting out at a ballpark? Probably not, right? So again, if we have a product that's been acidified to the point where they do not support pathogenic growth, we're okay. And again, keeping in mind, this is still talking commercially processed food. If the dressing is made in-house, date marking applies, right? So if we're making a ranch in-house, date marking. If it's a ranch we've bought and it's commercially processed, date marking may or may not apply. We need to know, is the food considered TCS, right? And ready to eat. So we may have to have some additional questions. You may have some operators, you may have some chains that provide evidence to show that their condiments are non-TCS. I can think of a couple of fast food chains that have documented and sent documentation in for their mayo or their, ranch, keeping it Midwest, and they're shelf stable, right, for the entirety of the time when they're open. So sometimes we're going to have to ask questions, right? All right, let's see what happens when we're combining foods. So Part C of this code provision discusses what happens if we take two foods that require date marking and we combine them. So if two or more of our ready-to-eat TCS foods are combined, the date marking from the earliest prepared food is what is required to be used. Essentially, you cannot extend the date marking just because you created a quote-unquote new food, right? So for example, let's say you cooked some chicken on Monday, you cooked your penne pasta on Wednesday, and then you combine the chicken pasta and a pesto sauce to make the final dish. The final product would have its date marked effective from the Monday cooked chicken date. So if we're seeing foods that are being combined, especially if they were, you have ingredients that were prepared on separate days, we're going to want to have conversations with our operators to ensure that date marking is accurate and that we're not just automatically assuming a 7-day window depending on when, our prepared ingredients were cooked or when opened, any of those things, right? All right. So Part D of this code provision discusses date marking systems, and it's noted in italics. Now, if you attended my food code workshop a couple of years ago, or if you've ever heard me speak about how to interpret the food code, you know that when you see things in the code in italics, we're not looking at debitable pieces, so we're not citing violations for this necessarily. Italics indicate we're seeing informational pieces, right? So while it's 350117D, it's considered non-debitable, if you will, but it does give us really good information. And the part of this provision describes options for date marking that would meet the intent of parts A and B. So the code mentions, operator may have to develop a method for foods that are frequently rewrapped. So someone mentioned deli meat, lunch meat, or a roast, or items where date marking is a challenge. Soft serve mix comes to mind, right? If it goes into the machine, you can't just throw a date mark sticker in the liquid, right? That's not going to work. Or milk dispenser. So they may have to get creative. They can work with you to make sure that that's going to make sense. Can be approved by you, no problem. Now, as long as you are in compliance with parts A and B of the date marking provision, are we going to tell folks what they have to use as far as their date marking system? Do we dictate the system they have to use? Nope, exactly. No, we don't want to in the first place, right? So the key we want is that it is applied throughout the establishment. And see, Emerson, 100% right on it, as long as it's consistent. So we're applying it throughout the facility. Does the person in charge and employees understand the system, and can they explain it to you, right? So it's one thing to have a system in play, but do we understand the system itself, right? So, we talk a lot about our routine inspections, asking good open-ended questions. So it's always good to ask, tell me about your date marking system. What do you use? And I think I asked you earlier, if someone tells you we're using a 3-day date marking system, is that a problem? No, not for us. You can always be more stringent than the code. And you may have several places that say, I don't keep anything past 5 days, or I'm only open 4 days a week. So everything that I prep on Monday is tossed by Thursday because I'm not open. So there's no need for me to keep it, right? So, more stringent, no problem, easy peasy. But we can't be more relaxed. So we're finding folks using an 8-day system. It's time to have a conversation and time to do some additional education. So you can see from our cute little sticker here at the bottom, this is one of our very common date marking stickers. So what kind of systems do you all see most often in your establishments? We see a lot. But what do you guys see most commonly? Okay. Masking tape and a marker, color-coded stickers, day of prep. Yeah, absolutely. So we see a little bit of everything, right? We see all kinds of good stuff. A blank label with a Sharpie, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those, the choice is yours and yours alone. Sharpie and a plastic wrap. Yeah. Grease pencils, 100%. Lots of options. As long as it's working and it can be explained, day dots for those that don't work for date marking. They can, but again, it comes down to that system, right? Does everyone understand the system, can explain it to you? Do you have kind of a code, right? So, here's a visual representation for some options that may be used for date marking systems. A facility might want to use date only, right? So if I make something on March 25th, I have to discard it by March 31st. So we put March 31st on it. Great. Greg, hopes and prayers. No, unfortunately, hopes and prayers by themselves is not going to be in conformance with the food code, but they are appreciated in helping folks determine what's going to work best. We may want to use day only. So rather than getting into the 25th, the 31st, maybe we don't want to deal with that level of numbers, but we put Saturday, right? So if we know that we prepare food on Sunday, if Sunday's our prep day, we can write Saturday on that label and we know we're tossing it all on Saturday, right? Do you all have any places that get really, really prescriptive, like down to the, date, time, et cetera? Like, for example, here that April 1st, 2018, 10 p.m. So we know, by April 1st, 2018 at 10 p.m., there's an exact time where we have to throw things away or we're in violation of our own system. Yeah, exactly. So we do see some places that do that. Some places get as specific as possible to really, take advantage of making sure we get that full 7 days and knowing when we're past our time. The key here is flexibility, right? It's built into this portion of the code to allow our industry partners to develop what's going to work best for their processes, right? And we like that, right? It's, again, you tell me what works for you, and as long as you can show us that it's working and it's working well, then we're cool. So let's talk about what happens if we freeze the food. All right. So let's walk through an example. The morning of October 1st. It's a crisp, cool morning. It's dark. I'm just kidding. But it's a morning of October 1st. We cook a chicken. We then cool it and we place it in our walk-in for 2 days at 41 degrees. Right. On October 3rd, we freeze it. So freezing stops our date marking clock. Right. We don't need to, even though we know, right, Listeria may still be present on frozen food. Is it growing? Are pathogens growing when things are frozen? Right, not growing. Perfect. not killed, but not growing. Exactly. All right, so freezing stops our clock. However, once we thaw the product, right, you only have the remaining days from the original date mark. So if we thaw the product on October 10th, our food must be consumed or discarded by October 14th. Does this make sense? Are we on the same page? Perfect. All right, I'm seeing the yeses rolling in. We love it. So to ensure proper date marking is taking place when we're doing some prep and holding, then freezing, then thawing, it's really a good idea to encourage our operators to have 4 dates, right? Let's have the date of preparation, the date of freezing, the date of thaw, and the date to be discarded. That way, nothing gets shuffled on the shelves. We don't tend to forget what day we're on, where we're at. Good practice to encourage operators to mark all 4 dates so everyone's on the same page. All right. So 35017E notes that individual meal portions, served and portions of food repackaged for sale from a bulk container upon consumer request do not require date marking. Why do you think this is? Why is that exempt from date marking? What do you think? "100%, Stephanie. Yep, it's in the customer's hands after that. So, once the food is in the customer's hands, the operator no longer has control of that food item. Absolutely. So yeah, date marking is not going to apply for an individual item upon consumer request. Now let's be clear about the second portion of that statement, right? Repackaged for sale from a bulk container upon consumer request. That's pretty specific language. So this exemption is not for pre-portioned individual servings that are prepped and held in the establishment in advance until they're sold or served. Those require date marking. So this is an individual portion being ordered by a customer that is then being scooped or served from the bulk container. Is the bulk container going to be date marked? Yes, it better. Yes, if it's TCS, absolutely. So yes, it better be. If it is ready to eat in TCS, yes. All right. Now, 35017F, Part F of this provision, notes specifically, called out, that date marking does not apply to shell stock. Why do you think that is? Okay, they're alive. Good. I mean, and they are. The definition of shell stock, right, it is that they are alive, right? We've got live mollusk and shellfish still in. They have separate date marking requirements. Well, we're gonna and we'll talk. So date marking versus shell stock tags, those are different concepts, right? So it's not really a date mark, but yes, we have a label for the 90 days based on our HEPA piece. But remember, what is the pathogen of concern for date marking? So shell stock tags are handling one thing. Date marking is to handle what? Listeria, absolutely. So keeping that in mind, right? And really, it's although listeria, has been isolated from shell stock, there have been no reported listeriosis cases linked to the consumption of this product at retail. Uh, and part of this is due to the competitive microflora. Like Listeria monocytogenes is really a poor competitor on raw product. So Rich, to your question, live lobsters. So again, shell stock is not lobsters are considered crustaceans. They are not mollusk and shellfish. So a little bit different. And again, that's a live product. So we're still not going to have date marking apply to the live lobsters at the store. But good question. So yeah, Listeria is a notoriously poor competitor. And so, we're not seeing the outbreak data to justify having to date mark. Can you imagine date marking like an individual shell of oysters? Wouldn't that'd be hilarious and sad all at the same time? And can you imagine being the guy tagged to do that? Oh my goodness. So yeah, so our shell stock is exempt from date marking. All right, now Part G of the date marking provision lists several foods that are exempt from Part B of 35017. Now, remind me again, what did Part B of this section cover? So Part B for date marking is specifically addressing what kind of foods? Okay, ready to eat, good, but take it a step further. So we know it's ready to eat. Ah, there it is. Our commercially processed foods, absolutely. So the list we're going to get into for our exemptions from date marking only apply when the foods are prepared and packaged by a food processing plant inspected by a regulatory authority. So our exemption list does not come into play if we're dealing with items that are made in-house. So yes, so it specifically says we're exempt from Part B. All right, now how do we decide which items to exempt? Because there's a fairly chunky list we're going to go through. So how did FDA come to this determination? Well, I'll tell you. Back many moons ago, around September of 2003, FDA, in cooperation with USDA and our CDC partners, released the quantitative assessment of the relative risk to public health from foodborne Listeria monocytogenes among selected categories of ready-to-eat foods. Whew, that is a mouthful, isn't it? Formal title of the risk assessment. And so this initiative included the development of 23 separate risk assessments and analysis of the relative risks of serious illness and death associated with the consumption of 23 categories of ready-to-eat foods, right? So we did a bunch of testing. And these categories included our seafood, produce, meats, dairy products, and deli salads. So let's see what we've got. All right, so in examining these things closely, so in these 23 risk assessments that we did, FDA showed that there's really 5 factors that are important in measuring the public health impact to consumers from foodborne listeriosis, right? So our factors are the amount and frequency of consumption of ready-to-eat food. So, in this country, some of these items are consumed rather frequently and in large amounts versus others. Another factor was, the frequency and levels of Listeria monocytogenes in ready-to-eat food, the potential of the food to support growth of the bacterium during refrigeration, refrigerated storage temperature, and then the duration of refrigerated storage before consumption, because that had a wide range. If you ever want to dig into the report, let me know. I'll send you the link. As you can expect, milk isn't really stored for a very long time before consumption because, as we talked about, spoilage bacteria, right? So it does turn at some point. Can you guess one of the foods that had the longest duration of refrigerated storage before consumption? It's very common. Lots of them are eaten. I feel like Stephanie's read the paper before because it was hot dogs. Hot dogs had an incredibly long duration of consumer storage prior to consumption. The old hot dog stuck around for a long time. So took all this into account, right? We looked at our 5 factors, and based on those 5 factors, the 23 categories of ready-to-eat foods were then ranked according to the relative risk of contamination of Listeria monocytogenes. And the risk categories that we used were very high risk, moderate risk, low risk, and very low risk. I know we were super creative. I know. You don't have to tell me. We're out there. And the foods noted on the list on the next slide represent the foods that were found to have a very low or a low risk of contamination and growth of Listeria and are therefore exempt from the date marking provision. And again, we're only talking about commercially prepared foods. So let's look at our list. All right. So again, only applied to items that they're commercially prepared and packaged in a processing plant. If we're making these in-house, they require date marking. First and foremost, our deli salads, right? So this includes commercially prepared ham salad, chicken salad, egg salad, seafood salad, pasta salad, potato salad, and macaroni salad. Has anyone gone to a family event where all of those options were on the table? That feels like a lot of salad. As Kristen says, yeah. Again, we're in the Midwest. You can't avoid half these salads, right? And these products are exempted specifically because they're often, they're acidified and they include preservatives to prevent the growth of Listeria, right? So, when they did a lot of the testing on these commercial salads, they don't grow. It doesn't grow. So those are all exempt. Our hard cheeses and our semi-soft cheeses have actually been exempted from date marking since 1999. Now, fear not. I have a list we're going to talk about on the next slide. So there's a ton of cheeses that don't require date marking. And we're going to get to telling ourselves, and everyone's going to admit to which of the cheeses you've had someone date mark, even though it didn't require it, because We're okay admitting our mistakes in this group. We're able to do that. All right, our next category is cultured dairy products. So this is going to include your yogurt, your sour cream, and your buttermilks. And again, as long as they are manufactured according to the federal requirements in the CFRs. Many of these products are really low pH foods, and they're manufactured with lactic acid fermentation. So again, the risk assessment showed that Listeria just was not growing in these foods. Again, only commercially processed, manufactured. Our preserved fish product, so our pickled herring, our dried or salted cod, or other acidified fish products, again, manufactured according to law. I do want to note that this exemption does not apply to hot or cold smoked fish products, nor does it apply to fish products that are dried, marinated, or otherwise preserved on site at the establishment. Right. And then to round out our exemption categories, include our shelf-stable dry fermented sausages, so that pepperoni and the Genoa, and our shelf-stable salt cure products, the prosciutto, the Parma ham. These are all very specific examples. And you'll hear me say it over and over again. If it's house-made, date marking applies. Now, the shelf-stable, if anyone has been following along with the Conference for Food Protection, which is next week in Denver, Colorado, is anyone going? Anyone going to CFP next week? If you're curious and we're interested, there was an issue submitted this year. It's Council 1, Issue 18, that's asking FDA to remove the shelf-stable sausages and salt-cured products from the provision. So stay tuned, and we'll see how things go. We'll see how the conversation goes at the table, and what our partners over at USDA, where the deliberation goes. So food for thought. All right, it's time for our cheese list. Now, this list is hard to read probably because it's so long, but you can find it in Annex 3 of the Model Food Code in our public health reasons. So, quick and dirty recommendation would be to have this either screenshot, stick it in your notebook where you keep your observations, because you'll need to know which of these cheeses are exempt from date marking. Everything on this list is exempt from date marking. So let's take a quick glance. Cheddar, Colby, Gruyere, Parmesan, blue cheese, provolone, Havarti, Gouda. All right, now be honest. How many of you have asked someone to date mark something on this list? Ain't no shame. Kristen says guilty. Absolutely, yeah. Because if we're not checking the list on a regular basis, yeah, so we've all done it, right? Absolutely. Yeah, I'm guilty. I did it when I was inspector at least once. So yeah. So it's good to have the list as a reference, because let me be clear, I do not expect any question. Carly's question, these cheeses are exempt. Does that mean they're not TCS? No, they are still TCS, right? But again, they are exempt from date marking if they are manufactured at a commercial processing facility. A lot has to do with the process. So yeah, just because something is exempt does not mean that it does not require cold holding. I love that question. Absolutely. So yes, cold holding still applies, but date marking is exempt. So yeah, the deli counter can be a place of confusion. Absolutely, knowing which products need to be, date marked versus not. And I would never expect a field inspector to have this memorized. There's no way. Just like I don't expect you to have the entirety of the 300 pages of the food code memorized. That's unrealistic expectations. If you can do it, I'm impressed. So yeah, here's our cheese list. All of these are exempt. Now, off the top of your head, what cheeses are not on this list that we already know are getting date marking? Anything come up in your mind that you're not seeing that you're like, okay, brie, absolutely. Maybe some feta. Swiss. If you look to the right side, Swiss is here. American. Okay. Perfect. All right. And so, Kurt, the main reason why these are exempt, and again, it comes down to the commercial manufacturer, and they have some intrinsic properties that prevent pathogen growth, right? So the reason why we're not going to have some of that has a lot to do with the way these materials are kind of how they're competing microorganisms, pH, water activity, salt concentration. So there's a lot of factors that go in. And again, when we did that assessment, we just found that they just weren't, they're in that low risk category. So we weren't causing a lot of outbreaks via Listeria through cheese. Not that cheese doesn't cause other outbreaks, because it can. Let me be clear. But again, pathogen of concern and the reason why we do date marking. So yeah, absolutely. Great job, guys. All right, so we made it through the full 3-501-17 code provision. As I mentioned earlier, there's another code provision we need to discuss. Now, I will also note, let's go back to cheese real quick. If you have deli folks that want to date mark everything, for quality or to keep things consistent, that's perfectly fine. Does not violate the food code, right? So if everything is date marked, great. It just doesn't mean it's a violation. All right, so we'll just need to make sure we have that. Absolutely. All right, so let's talk the other code provision I mentioned. So 3-501-18, it's our sister provision. It's our disposition. So 3-501-18 Part A requires that foods exceeding the time and temp requirements in 3-501-17 should be discarded, right? So if we've gone past our 7-day window, these are the foods you're going to find in the walk-in cooler on day 9, day 10, maybe day 15. Oops, we left it in the very, very back and we're on day 35 and it's starting to grow some stuff on their date marking sticker. So we're going to want to discard those, right? Because now we know that we're past the point of no return within our provision. So Part A also notes that foods that are not marked with a date mark when they're required should be discarded, or if food is improperly marked, should be discarded. But one recommendation, what's one thing we should do before we just start chucking things in the trash can? What should we probably do if we find things that aren't marked? Absolutely. Yep, we want to ask some good questions. Because date marking is not required until a food is held for how long? What's our threshold? Absolutely, you guys, 24 hours. Yep. So we want to be clear in how we approach the conversation, right? We do not want to be forcing a discard on foods that do not need to be tossed. That makes operators pretty irritated with us, which then makes our bosses irritated with us, and then we don't feel great about it, and we cost money. So we want to make sure we're really asking good questions. Now, Part B of disposition addresses vending machines for our TCS ready-to-eat foods that are cold held, essentially saying the same thing. If we're past our date mark, right, we have to have those discarded. All right, so let's talk quickly about, when to mark the inspection form and where date marking and disposition are cited. So Annex 7 contains the marking instructions for the FDA Model Food Establishment Inspection Report, which I believe you all have adopted across Illinois. Date marking and disposition are noted under item 23 on this form. And so this item is in compliance when there is a system in place for date marking all foods that are required to be date marked and is verified through observation. So if date marking applies to the establishment, the person charged should be asked to describe their methods, which we've kind of already talked about, right? We need to know what foods require date marking, and then we're asking those good questions, having good conversation to ensure we're clear on what method that they're using. For our disposition, we're going to mark in when all foods are within the appropriate date mark time limits or food is observed being discarded within date mark time limits, right? So if they're actively throwing things away and it's day 7, cool, we're happy with that. We want to mark out when our date marking exceeds the 7-day window or if date marking is not done. If you go into a walk-in cooler and not a single prepared food has a date mark on it, we need to, 1, ask some questions, and 2, we probably got a problem. Now, this item may be marked NA if there are no foods present that require date marking, right? Entirely possible. And it may be marked NO if the establishment handles foods that require date marking, but no foods requiring date marking are in the facility at the time of inspection. So, for example, if the only foods that I have in my facility that are going to require date marking would be my diced tomatoes and my cut lettuce, but all I have on site right now are whole tomatoes and whole heads of lettuce, that might be an NO. Probably not being seen a whole lot, but it is there. All right, so we've made it through, and because it's me, we're going to do some test your knowledge, and we're going to see what we think and how far we've come in the 45 minutes we've been together. Are we ready? Yes. All right. Perfect. Yeah. See, I promised and I demanded interaction. Kristen says, let's go. Let's do it. All right. So which of these foods in the walk-in cooler require date marking? Gender may be ready. So which of these foods require date marking? Okay, I'm seeing a variety of answers. Some B, some C, potato salad, maybe all of it, some raw chicken, B, C, D, B, and C. Let's see what we think. It is B and C. Now, house potato salad, the pan of macaroni and cheese. Now, I can see if we weren't sure if the mac and cheese, if it was commercial prepared, if it wasn't open, you'd be correct, it would not. If it is open, we'll assume it's open. We'll assume it's house made, date marking. Now, our raw chicken is TCS, but it's not considered ready to eat. At least I hope for the sake of your operators and your communities, we're not considering raw chicken to be ready to eat. So we're not going to date mark raw chicken. And telling on myself, in my previous life as a baby inspector, on a training inspection, I absolutely 100% did tell an operator to date mark his raw chicken wings and had my supervisor look at me like I'd lost my mind. And then she made me read the code provision like 10 times in a row. Remember, like in the movies when they had you like write your I will not do this 10 times? Yeah. So if there's no label on it at all. You mean like if the raw chicken has no label on it at all to tell you that it's raw chicken? So I want to be clear, we're talking. So So I think with our labeling, right, we want to be kind of careful. Is if you can see it as raw chicken, I'm not going to say that we have to have a label on it saying raw chicken. So yeah, so diced green onions, these are going to be our raw diced green onions. And so what I was kind of going with this was our raw chicken is TCS but not ready to eat, and our diced green onions are ready to eat but not TCS. So our date marking, but that's right. But if we cook those onions, yep, then they become TCS and ready to eat, and now they would require date marking. So great question, Jeff. Good job. All right, let's do another one. You begin your routine inspection at 2 p.m. You notice 3 containers of diced tomatoes in the reach-in cooler that are not date marked. Is this a violation of 3501.17? Yes, no, or need more info? All right. I love it. That's right. We're going to need some more information. So what conversation should we have with the operator? So the majority of y'all got it right. Absolutely. So yeah, we want some more info. What are you going to ask? What's the conversation look like? Did you cut these? How long are they going to be held? When was it diced? Yep, keeping them for 24 hours. Were these prepped? Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So yeah, first and foremost, when were they prepared and how long are they being held? If I'm the operator, I'll tell you that the tomatoes were cut at 10 a.m. and used before the end of the day. Do I now need to date mark them? If I'll throw anything left over at the end of the day out before I close tonight? No, great. If I tell you that my employee cut them yesterday and threw them in the reach-in for today's service, should they be date marked? Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Now, if the tomatoes were prepped at 10 a.m. and will be used over the next few days, are we date marking? Ooh, Laura, what time yesterday? Yeah, getting down to the 24-hour piece. I like that. But yeah, we did them yesterday. We're going to use them the next few days. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, we want to ask those questions. And another good question we may want to ask is, when you're talking about the date marking systems, is when do you date mark? Is it at the end of the day, at the end of prep? Different, places may have different procedures. Most often, we tend to see that the folks doing the prep are the ones doing the date marking, right? It's just they're the ones that know when they finish cutting the product or preparing it. Most likely a time of prep. Yep. But you may have an establishment that decides they want to do something a little bit different, right? As long as that date marking system works, is in line with the code, and everyone's on the same page with it, we'll go with it. But yeah, usually I would say 98% of the time it's at that time of prep because they're the person that has control over the product and yep, has the responsibility. All right, great job. Question 3. Now, if an operator takes a commercially prepared potato salad and then adds ingredients, we're going to say house-made ingredients, or we add grilled onions and boiled eggs, does this product require date marking? Yes, no, or it depends. All right, the A's have it, and you were correct. And I love that people are catching on a yes after 24 hours. Yep. So while our commercially prepared potato salad would be exempt from date marking, right? The minute we introduce foods that require date marking and combine them, we no longer are qualified under that exemption. If we're holding it longer than 24 hours, our date marking would apply. Yeah, and I did. I used to work at a little mom and pop's hot dog shop that would take a commercial prepared red skin potato salad and add grilled onions and fresh cooked bacon into it. And honestly, it's pretty banging, not gonna lie. All right, let's do a hard one. Does raw fish for sushi require date marking? All right, I'm seeing some A's, I'm seeing some C's. Yes, if the sushi is made. I'm saying just the raw fish. All right, for my C's, what else do you need to know? What question do you have for me? Is it still in the package? Not a listeria issue. Is it being mixed with anything? Has it been frozen and thawed? Ah, we're getting on some good things. So while I will say, if it is a raw fish, and we're not talking frozen, technically it does require date marking. Now, no, stay with me here, right? So raw, ready-to-eat fish intended to be served raw should be date marked and used discarded within 7 days of receipt. Now that being said, how do we typically receive these products? If they're received frozen, are we still counting date marking? No, we're not. Nope. If it is coming in frozen, because remember freezing, we're not worried about it, right? But if we thawed that fish, and if we're thawing it, should it still be in the package? No. All right, cool, perfect. So yeah. So although, and someone did mention, Listeria is a poor competitor on raw animal products, right? If raw animal foods are received and intended to be served raw, they are considered ready to eat. So we have a classification of food that's considered raw, ready to eat. And remember, what were the two things we need for date marking to apply? We need it to be ready to eat and TCS, and then yes, that 24-hour piece. I saw some people put in the chat, what if it's not held for 24 hours? If we're thawing, serving, and it's gone, we're good, right? So we come back to that, how long is it here? Do we typically see our sushi fish, once it's been thawed, sitting in our establishment for more than a day? Do we usually, from a quality standpoint, we typically don't. Now, I want to note that while we're talking raw, ready to eat, this does not apply to raw animal foods that are going to be served undercooked upon consumer request. So we are not saying we are not going to date mark our raw beef patties just because someone may ask for the burger to be medium rare, right? Because that item is not considered ready to eat until it is undercooked per the consumer request and it's served. So we're not holding within 24 hours, right? And I'll agree with you on this question. I think we could have gone with it depends. So I will change that for my next presentation because I think we need more information, right? How long is it being held? What state is it in? So fantastic job. All right. So with that, I believe we had some questions that popped in. And let me take a peek. All right, had some
Able to
answers.
see the Q&A questions?
Yes.
Okay, all right, perfect. I was like, there's a lot in there. I was about to read them off for you.
Perfect. So let's start the first one. Ooh, Walter came in with a good one. Where's the line between raw agricultural commodity and ready-to-eat food with your example, orange? Right. So ready-to-eat food. When is that orange ready to eat? It's considered ready to eat when we peel it, right? So I think that's when we're going to be eating it. We're not. And if you have someone that's biting into oranges with the rind on them, have questions. So if the standard is to serve, sorry, and I'll go back to Jamlin's question in the chat. So if the standard is to serve it undercooked, should it be date marked? No, because that product is still considered raw. It's not considered ready to eat, even if their standard is to serve it undercooked, because that product is a raw animal product that is not considered ready to eat. Does that make sense, Jamlin? I want to make sure I have that one right. Okay, perfect. All right. And Anonymous Denise, so just to clarify, for open milk past the 24-hour date, are our facilities required to add a date label for 7 days when open date? Yes. Milk would require date marking, but we're not using that sell by date. Great question. All right. How do you handle grocery stores that save the ends of meat and package together and sell the bulk packet of multiple ends? The label just lists lunch meat, not all meats in the pile. Oh, so we have a couple of things going on. So first, we need to know, what it is, when it was cut. You likely have a date marking issue. So I think we need to get some more information from the operator on what it is that they're doing. I'm not saying that you can't lump the end of, turkey and roast beef and ham and things like that. It's not that you can't necessarily do it, but the label itself, we need to make sure we know what's in it. Because anything that's packaged in the establishment that's offered is required to be labeled per the code. So there's a couple pieces there. So yeah, if we have that going on, reach out. Let's talk about some things we can do with that establishment. All right, and Carly coming in with the questions on mayonnaise and dressings regarding a PubMed article. Ooh, I'll take a peek. So are we talking about mayonnaise, like commercially prepared mayonnaise and salad dressings? Carly, I'm assuming is that we're asking? Yes. So typically your commercial prepared mayonnaise, they are highly acidified. So it's a lot of times we're not going to, it's not going to grow anything. Now, if we add it into other things that may require date marking, you know, if we're adding it to, if we're making our own chicken salad in house and we're using a commercial prepared mayonnaise, but we're still having chicken, we're still going to date marking. And I haven't clicked on your article, but I will, and I will follow it. And again, dressings, some of it's going to matter. Some of it's going to depend on how it's made, what it is. So if it's something that's been highly acidified at the manufacturing level, again, if it's not growing anything, then then is it TCS? So the key here is it TCS? All right. Can we copy the PowerPoint? I will absolutely share copies of the slides with IEHA. Justin, remind me, and I'll get those to you. All right. So Carly, for raw beef, which would be cut for beef tartare served raw. So when you look at the code provision, because I love that question for beef tartare, because you're thinking the same lines as the sushi fish, right? So tartare. So the way the date marking provision in the code reads is the date of preparation. So if we just have our raw beef, right? So it gets a little dicey there, but we want to make sure we're clear. Is when are we preparing it, and how long are we holding it? And I will say, I think raw beef for tartare is gonna be one of those where we're not holding it for very long either. So yep, we want to see some date marking on that. So I would be asking some questions in that facility. Good question. All right, let me see. Let's see, Ashley, if an inspector found cooked meatloaf prepared on Sunday and it's not date marked, the inspector put the date in violation to prove it's been more than 24 hours. They say date marked, meatloaf is not date marked in the cooler. I'm always a big proponent as a former inspector and a former program manager. I like being as specific in my citation as possible. And this is me. I would say follow your jurisdiction's documentation requirements. But for me, if an operator tells me that something was prepared on Sunday, I will note that. Observed cooked meatloaf without date mark. Operator stated food was prepared on Sunday. If you're there on a Wednesday, I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's more than 24 hours. Yep. And again, if your violation standard for how you guys want to write code citations is cooked meatloaf not date marked, then that's also okay. Like the way you all apply that and how you write things is completely up to your jurisdiction discretion, I would say. All right. So Rich has a question, what about wild game? So again, if we have a TCS and ready to eat product, date marking will apply. So if we have cooked venison, wild game, absolutely. Yep. Same rules apply. The key here is held more than 24 hours, ready to eat, and TCS. The 45-degree angle cut on the bone was, yeah, I just had a flashback to a college job, so that's great. Okay. Let's see, and I want to make sure I respect time. Let me see, is it appropriate to allow a whole piece of deli meat to remain as used by date if properly contained, sliced, relabeled as 7-day? So again, used by date, is this based on safety or is it based on quality? So we want to be really careful, make sure we're being clear on what that manufacturer's date is. So that manufacturer's date is only coming into play if it is a safety date. So yeah, once we have opened that package, so let's use deli turkey, right? Once we've opened the chub, if you will, we start slicing 7 days. And then Lindsay, cold curing salmon. So cold cure salmon, a cold cure is not considered a kill step because we've not applied any type of a kill step. So yeah, that's why that curing smoking is really not considered out of that exemption for. And cold curing salmon, I think that's another topic for another day. So Justin, write that down. Fantastic questions, fantastic. Again, it's so great to see you all. So glad to be here for your spring virtual conference. So. Is there an obvious way to tell if a date is determined by safety? Not really. Sometimes we're going to have to get information from a manufacturer, but that's a great question. So yeah, with that, I think that's where I am. As always, thank you all so much. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Email is carolyn.white1. There is a number in my email at fda.hhs.gov. It's always great to see you all, and I will turn it back over. And I think we ended right on time.
We did. Thank you, Carolyn, so much for your presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Before we wrap up, Justin, is there anything that you wanted to add before we close out for today?
Just a reminder, we will go ahead and get the the CEU forms out to everyone very soon. Our office will be emailing those out, and I will make sure that that gets announced when. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed day one. Phenomenal lineup of speakers. Thank you to all of our speakers, all our participants. We can't do this without you. So everyone have a great evening, and we will see everyone back on Thursday. Thanks.
Bye.